And if you guys ever get a chance to spend Halloween with them, their costumes are epic. So getting back to the reason why we're here today, as mentioned before, James has had over 35 years of exemplary service with the fire service in both structural firefighting and in the governance of his fire departments down here. So in recognition of this, both the federal and provincial governments extend their appreciation by issuing medals. For federal is 20 years and provincial is 25, and then every subsequent 10 years. So it's unfortunate, and I must apologize that due to COVID and there's some supply issues that we still have not received your 35 award pin and bar. So that can be distributed to you at a different time. But I do, however, have a 25-year medal that I wish to present to you on behalf of the Office of the Fire Commissioner and our staff and the province. Maybe we could get pictures after, which would be nice. Yeah. Each of the medals are personalized and they are engraved with the recipient's name and the years of service. I also have one more long service award to present. And many years ago, the Office of the Fire Commissioner had some spousal pins that were developed. And unfortunately, they're not in existence anymore, but I got the last one. And this is going to be for Brigida. And she has been James's right hand for many, many years. And I'm very proud to give this to you and that this is opening another chapter for you both. So congratulations on you both. This bouquet of flowers is from the fire chief. Yeah, so this is for you. You could give them to your husband. You look better with it. Thank you.
So we'll just take a 5-minute recess so that we can bring everybody up for pictures. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I truly appreciate the opportunity to spend time with, learn from, and mentor the fire chiefs of the Comox Valley. I've had an exceptional run. Some of the changes that we've made are being replicated now in other parts of the province, and I want to thank all of the fire chiefs of the Comox Valley for being there, being the part of the team that has modernized the fire service, for taking on those new roles, for being mentors themselves in moving forward and modernizing. Long after I'm gone, these gentlemen will be modernizing the fire service to the benefit of all residents of the Comox Valley. And I want to thank each and every one of you for that. And to the board for allowing me the opportunity to be here. It's humbling. Thank you.
So at this point, we'll just take the recess and do some pictures with the chiefs and James and the commissioners and his family, and then we'll call the board of directors up to also participate in some pictures. Thank you. I think so. It's pretty nice out. James, it's up to you. You want to be again? Yeah. Yeah. Let's go outside around the figure out there. Yeah.
It's interesting how they found this. So I guess they're sharing this.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Hi, Lisa, can you hear me?
I can, Director Lee. Sorry, we're just testing some of our equipment in the civic room.
Oh, good. I can't seem to get on my regular computer, so I'm on my little iPad.
Okay.
If I would have known James was having a presentation, I would have come in person, maybe.
Oh, okay. It was a
But
surprise.
it's okay.
Okay, we're just gonna have a short recess. Thank you.
Okay.
please. Calling all directors, please return to your seats. Unfortunately, it's sunny outside, so they don't want to come back in. Well, we're still on receipt, yep, of the presentation. So all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. So we're on to adoption of minutes. And those are the adoption of minutes from May 24th for the regular board. Any comments? All in favor of adoption of minutes? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And then there's minutes from the 31st. Okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And we are on business arising from minutes. So Arbor and Grant, and that's moving receipt of Town of Comox letter on regional park service. And I will pass it to staff.
Directors and chair, the regional district with collaboration of the municipalities have been considering a regional park service. That was undertaken through study work that was presented to the municipalities and the regional district. Each of the participants were asked for the potential participation in a regional service, and this is the response from the town of Comox. Later on the agenda, there is consideration of the bylaws that would move forward with the service. Those bylaws that would then go out to the participants for their consent. The board could choose to discuss this matter now or move it to the consideration of the bylaws.
Thank you. We do have some lights on here, so we'll start with Director Swift.
Thank you. And I guess that was my question, whether we should be discussing this now or a little later on. I think one of the main items that at Comox we wanted to have considered was the governance structure, where we have the ability to disagree with or defeat a recommendation at the committee level as well, as long as we have another party that agrees as well. Because I guess one of the considerations is there are no bad parks. How are we going to limit this? We have a lot of questions about it, and the ability, we cannot, once we're in the service, we can't get out. So this would give us some reassurance that we would have a little bit more control, I guess, with how this moves forward. And the other piece that really wanted to be considered were the greenways and the connectivity between areas. So those are the two things that we'd really like to have considered as well. If we could have kind of a general idea of a list of where we're going. I know we got guidelines, but just about any piece of land could fit into most of those guidelines. So it seems like it's limitless in what we could do with this service.
Thank you, Director. And next we have Director Arbor.
Thank you. So essentially what this request is, when I read the implementation of it, assuming you get 2 votes, that you would require 3 votes to defeat something. And that would not be unique to Comox. So in other words, that would also grant, if we think in blocks, which we don't, it would also give Courtney the ability with 3 votes to defeat any proposal as well. So that is, I think, as I was earlier, I would prefer if we kept to a simpler model. I understand why Comox is coming with this, and also with the, the concerns expressed about feeling like he can have a little bit more power. But I think, as with our other discussion, there's unintended consequences sometimes if you go there. I think it's. I'm glad this letter came in advance of our further discussion today, and I'll definitely be considering it when we get to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Morin.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe this is more of a question for later, so if so, you can ask me to wait. Just in terms of the potential committee, I thought that we had discussion that there would be criteria developed for selection of parks, and that the criteria would be based on all of those things that we discussed, like environmental protection, and I think that actually connectivity was in there, excuse me, and that regional parks is exactly what it is, and that it means that it doesn't mean that there would necessarily be built-in equity for, this year Comox gets a park, this year area gets a park, but as a collective, we would look at the benefit to the whole. And I think also looking at many of our regional parks, obviously a regional park in Comox benefits people outside of Comox and vice versa. So I guess I'm just wondering whether the criteria for that committee would address some of the concerns maybe that Comox has in terms of selection. And I don't know who's best to answer that, but maybe staff has some thoughts on that.
Thanks. Jake is coming to the table. He'll provide some perspective. And I think a lot of work has been done, as well as Doug. A lot of work has been done to sort of formulate how the service would move forward, the role of the committee and how it would work, and that would share. Ultimately, if Comox feels comfortable with where we're at, that will be a political decision for them to make. I'd just like to also mention that if you tonight do give readings to the bylaws, that then sets in motion requesting consent of the participants. And that then puts the actual bylaw in front of councils for them to decide whether it meets the mark or not. And that then to be not just the representatives here speaking on behalf of their councils, but the councils as a whole to decide whether they're comfortable with this or not. Jake or Doug, do you have any other insight?
Thank you. Through the chair, I will briefly touch on the regional land acquisition principles that were included in response to the former letter provided by Comox. We did outline a number of items in the land acquisition criteria that will be sent along with this bylaw to accommodate that. And really the guiding principles once again focus on reconciliation, being future focused, environmental protection, connectivity, fiscal responsibility, partnerships, and proximity. And further, it should be noted that much like was said before, it's really looking as a collective benefit of the whole. And there would be no parklands, for example, that would be acquired through coercion of individual property owners. And all land acquisition activities must identify and consider the interests of the KFN and the need to collaborate where responsible, with a focus on the uniqueness of the cultural and historical significance, the ecological connectivity, as well as recreational values. I won't go through the whole principles list that will be included, but that's the general sentiment of that list to help guide the councils in their decision making, if you so choose to, with the bylaw readings today, to move forward with sending them to our respective councils. And Jake will just quickly touch on the 2/3 majority currently proposed in the bylaw.
Thanks. Yeah, Madam Chair, if I can just clarify. So the framework that had been developed provided for essentially a vote and representative for every 10,000 population within each of the representative areas. So given that electoral areas are only eligible to have one representative, essentially that guidance or that limitation would be only be placed on them. The municipalities would have an additional representative for each vote that they have. With a total of 9 votes that would essentially be considered with this service, that 2/3 requirement would mean that there would need to be 6 votes in favor. So if, for instance, Comox and another jurisdiction voted against it, it wouldn't defeat that. The only way that could occur is essentially if there was a higher threshold than 2/3, such as a 75% threshold required, in which case the unintended consequence of that would be that Courtney would then have a veto essentially on all decisions. So just wanted to provide that information. Thanks.
Thank you. Excuse me, Director Gray.
Yeah, thank you. So the devil's always in the details, and I think when we brought this, I think I kind of knew that it was going to be harder than it appeared to get this right. But you know, if we can look at the bylaws and get a chance to take them back to our council after they're drawn, we wanted to make sure that we had this in front of you before you drew them up so that you could actually see what our concerns are. And I think that probably other areas should be a little bit concerned about this. You know, this is a service that once you get in, you can't get out. And so we want to make sure we get it right from the beginning. And, you know, it's the age-old governance argument. And I think governance is always the hardest thing to deal with in any government, is to get it right so that everybody's happy. We just want to make sure that, you know, if you wanted to go buy a park and it was something that we vehemently didn't like, that we would have to at least get it with one other participant not agreeing, we could stop that purchase, I guess, is what we're looking at. There's a lot of dollars at stake here in some of these. And so we just want to make sure that we get that right. And that when the bylaws do come back to our council, that we have some comfort with them. You know, the other thing is the acquisitions list. And I think that you're going to find that that's probably going to be the real bugbear, is how you figure out which it is. But to Wendy's point, if you think that you're going to buy one in Cumberland this week and one in Comox the next time, it's just not the way it works. It's going to go by when they come available. And that might mean that 5 of them come available in Area A before any come available in Cumberland, for example. And that's, you know, you have to know that when you're going into this. So, but we just want to make sure that it's something that we have comfort with when we go. And I think, Russell, you said that you would drop the bylaws and this would come back to us and we could consider it at our council before it was adopted. Am I correct with that?
The bylaws are on for readings tonight on the agenda. So with it's 2 readings, and then it's provided for 3 readings, and then it's provided for the consideration of the municipalities to consent. So that is built in before adoption can be provided.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Swift.
Thank you. And just to be clear, I don't think Comox is expecting that there's going to be large purchases within our town boundaries. We are looking at a regional approach. And that being said, there are so many opportunities in our region that to find the most important ones and agree on them is critical.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Hamir.
Thanks. Well, Director Swift just said what I was going to say. I think I don't think it's going to be a surprise that many of these properties are probably going to be in the regional district, unserviced lots that are affordable for park. So I think, you know, I'm glad, you know, that that's on the table. But I just wanted to ask staff, you know, in terms of procedures, because I'm hearing a little bit of concern over maximum requisition. When in the procedures would we understand what that could look like? Have staff put their mind to a number amount for taxing?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, so the requirement, there is no requirement for outlining a maximum requisition in a regional parks and trails service establishment bylaw. Generally all other services do require that, but there is an exception for regional parks and trails. However, I understand as part of the development of the proposed service, there was consideration given to the budget, in which Doug DeMarzo can speak maybe in more detail to that.
Yeah, I think during the background materials that are sent to your councils and have been sent to your councils outlines what we need to get this service started and understand what it takes to get that strategic plan underway. Start speaking in real terms to the community to understand their priorities and our partners who have always been helpful in conservation of areas within this community. Most importantly, those decisions will be your decisions. Will be your decisions as a commission once appointed and move through that process on what you want to set the maximum recs or what you're comfortable, not necessarily setting the maximum recs, but setting the budgets at based on the opportunities that come forward for you to consider. So those lie in the hands of those that will be appointed at this future board to sit on that commission. And really it's out there in the process. Like that budget won't even be determined until after 2024. Because 2023 will be establishing that initial consultation with the community, establishing those strategic priorities, and then it'll be time to put those priorities into action. And that action will be based on those earlier consultations.
If I may, just a further comment. You know, I'm hearing some of the fears, and I just wanted to you know, support that. I know our community really values parkland and is willing to pay for that parkland, but I don't think everybody's pockets are endless. And so I think many, I wouldn't say all of us around the table are very much aware of what the cost of taxation, and this would not be an extravagant service, but I just think, you know, we've seen certain parcels that we have been so close to getting, and just the regional park service that's currently within the electoral areas just did not have enough of a, you know, financial backing to it in order to purchase. So, you know, just want to stress how important it is for us to work together. It's the combination of all of our areas that is going to make this possible. And I look forward to seeing a lot more connectivity, a lot more area protected in parks. And hopefully, I'm very sure we can work together on this. Thanks.
Thanks. Next we have Director McCollum.
Thanks. Yeah, when I was reviewing this letter, the question that came to mind was just what the difference would be in the proportion of votes versus what we discussed, and what it would look like to have Comox +1. And from Jake's answer earlier, it sounds like it's 75% instead of 67%. And to me, that's an acceptable change if that's in fact what the town of Comox is looking for in this letter. I certainly understand the reservations around just the unknowns in a service that we haven't had in our community before. And if a change like this would give the service a greater level of confidence with those that are going to participate, then that's something that I find supportable. I mean, I recognize it does put us at a risk that perhaps we would have a more difficult time in agreeing, but these are big purchase decisions in the future. Generally, land is not getting any cheaper. So if it requires a board to have a higher majority to support decision-making, that's a change that I would find supportable. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Director Morin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I totally understand the concerns from Comox. And just to clarify my point, I agree with Director Grant that, yeah, we don't, an area may come up in, there may not even be an area come up in Comox at all. So I understand that that would be a factor in decision-making. You'd have to see a benefit to your community in some way if it wasn't in your community. I guess I just think of I found the language in this motion a bit concerning with the word ability to defeat recommendations. And it would have been nice to have seen more of a collaborative type of language in terms of, I see the intention behind this motion, but it really kind of, to me, sets up yeah, I mean, to defeat the idea is to defeat recommendations rather than to create a process that is fair and collaborative and benefits everyone. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think that if we're going to do this regional park service, we all have to come with that intention and come from that place of really wanting to see collaboration and benefiting the whole. And when I see we want the desire to defeat recommendations, to me, it's concerning that that's the type of language that was chosen. I don't know who made the motion, but it brought up some flags for me in terms of the intention. Thanks.
Director Grant.
Yeah, well, the intention is just to make sure that we're protecting our citizens, but this motion was made at the table, sort of on the fly. And it's a motion from the town of Comox. It doesn't really reflect what will happen at the regional district. I think that if our concerns are addressed within the bylaws after we move forward, that I think everybody would be happy with that. You know, nobody in Comox is trying to say no to this. We actually want, I think it was actually us that brought this concept to the table, that we want this to happen, but we just want to make sure that we're in good footing with it. So I think if you can just reflect what our thoughts are in the bylaws, I think we'll all be good.
Director Swift.
Thank you. And I think we went at it with the notion that we would probably, it would be unlikely we were ever in that position, that we would have to defeat something, given the guidelines and so on, that we would be collaborative and find projects that we wanted to move forward on. But at the off chance we didn't, we wanted to have the ability to say no and make it count.
Yeah, I think that's understood. So right now in the bylaw, it is written the super majority, as we've discussed, the 2/3 or 67%. And it's been put out that we could have a super majority. That is like a 3/4 or 75%. So maybe we could discuss that further. I think, you know, to Director Moran's comments, you know, you can approach it as, you know, it is trying to get to the consensus model by having, you know, the smallest number of people being able to have some power over the conversation and you know, not having their concerns missed. So, you know, I think we are trying to reach that consensus model, and a super majority is sort of getting as close to that as we can. And I don't know what directors from Comox think about the difference between those two, and whether one is preferable, the super majority or the super majority.
We want the super duper majority. No, you know, I think we just want to have our, you know, just to make sure that that it's reflected in the bylaws. And I think that if you went to the 75%, it's hard for us to speak for our council, because I don't know what they would think, but I think that would probably do what we want. I don't know, what are your thoughts? But I think they'd be happy with that.
Well, when Jake was talking about the voting system, it seems like when I was thinking about it, I thought it was 10 votes, but you're saying it's 9. So if it was Comox plus one other, we'd already have that ability to defeat something, correct? Is that correct?
Through the chair, yeah, only at that 75% threshold. If there's 9 total votes and we're at the 2/3 or 67%, then 6 votes would essentially be required. So, yeah, the suggestion is that if it is the desire to have essentially 3 votes, then you need to go to the 75%.
Okay. I think our council would probably be happy with that, but we'd have to consult with them. What's that?
It's an argument.
Yeah.
So this is a question to staff. If that's the case, should we amend the bylaw tonight to the 75%? Or should we pass the 67%, allow it to go back to council? What's the best process here?
Certainly at the will of the board and what you want to choose. But if the board feels like an amendment is necessary to the bylaw as it currently stands, then certainly you could give first reading to the bylaw as it currently is with the 67, and then pass a motion to amend the bylaw to reflect the 75% threshold. And then you'd give second reading as amended, and then third reading. And then that would, as Russell has described, kickstart our process to forward that bylaw amended to the councils and the area directors for their consent.
Okay.
Madam Chair, my advice in creating any service would never be to create a service where one of the members has the majority of vote. So I would encourage you to go with a version that it has no more than 2 participants that would carry the day, as opposed to enabling a single individual. That's just based on my experience and what I've seen in the past.
Director Grieve.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Well, seeing as though we're receiving a letter, maybe we could proceed with that and then maybe bury the agenda and bring forward G2.
Okay, well, we do want to kind of set this up so that we can have proper direction when we do reach the bylaw, if there is going to be an amendment. So that's why we're having the discussion now. Director Graham.
Yeah, so I somewhat had the same concern that Russell has, but I don't know why. You know, I was looking at it and wondering, like, if we were going to go out and buy a park and Courtney vetoed it for whatever reason they would, I think public input would have a big part in this. So maybe you could just, like, I get what you're saying, but I'm trying to, on the fly here, put it into perspective for this service.
Yeah, if I could step back and just provide a bit of my experience. And I've worked as a parks planner for the Regional District of Nanaimo, for the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District, and the Comox Strathcona Regional District. And what those 3 jurisdictions have is a real large geography and a real challenge to meet an equitable distribution of parks. It's because of the size and the geography. You don't have that in the Comox Valley. You are a compact geographical entity. It's easy for an individual on the outskirts of the region to travel to a park on the furthest distance. Anything that you establish as a regional park will be accessible to all citizens pretty well easily. So I wouldn't become too concerned about the geographical distributions of the parks that you create, and realize, as Doug has explained, this is going to be a fulsome process of consultation with the public to identify those priorities and get it right. I think, you know, try and put your mind in the citizen 50 to 60 years down the road, and what would they have wanted you to do at this time. And I think it is have faith, establish a system, and start to get and secure the lands. I think when citizens walk through Seal Bay, they don't think of governance. They think of the beauty of the land and the fact that the regional district was there to protect lands and make them available. And that's really what this service is all about.
Okay. No further lights, no further comments? Oh, Director Killian, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify and go out on a bit of a limb that City of Courtney has no interest in having a veto in relation to this service.
Thanks for that input. Okay, so we are on receipt of the letter. We'll be dealing with the bylaw later in the agenda. So all in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And there was a motion, Director Grieve, to vary the agenda for Director Lee.
I would move we vary the agenda at this point because we're hot on the topic. Keep them in the hot seat over there.
So that would bring F1 up next, the Black Creek Oyster Bay.
Oh, no, I'm looking at the bylaw. Yeah, because it's just continuation of discussion. It's not, maybe we'll deal with it now.
Yes, Director Hillian. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Chair, I'm not sure if of what I'm about to say, but I note that Director Lee is on the call, and generally we amend the agenda to bring her items forward. And I'm just wondering if there's
Yeah.
any consideration that's been given to that.
Yeah, we missed that when we first varied the agenda at the beginning. So
That's fine if Brenda wants to do that, because I thought she was enjoying this discussion.
Director Lee, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, our corporate officer has told me that I have to stay for a related issue to F1 in the in camera. So I'm gonna have to sit through the whole meeting anyway to know when the in camera is going up.
Okay, staff did say that they could text you if you wanted to, but you're of course welcome to stay.
Well, if you're faster than you have been so far, I could just stay and then deal with the in camera right at the beginning of the in camera. And that would be, then I don't have to risk missing anything. I got a lot of stuff going on here at home too that I got to keep an eye on. So I would like to just stay and deal with the in-camera item related to the F1 at the beginning of the in-camera meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so we won't vary the agenda. We're back to the regular agenda, and that brings us item 2, the automotive service stations in electoral area. Amir and Arbor, thank you. And I will pass it to staff to discuss.
Sorry, or is this Director Arbor's initiative to present?
Okay, Director Arbor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So basically, the reason why this is coming to the board is the ASC, I guess at a meeting 2 meetings ago, decided to put forward for consideration amendment to how we treat automotive service stations in rural areas as part of our planned zoning update in 2023. And there was another motion for me to participate in a Canadian and US network of municipalities that are working on banning new gas stations. And third was to pass it on to the nearby jurisdictions, because it's widely acknowledged that if we only did that in the rural areas or in some areas, that would not address the core problem. So this is the type of initiative that requires regional collaboration. I was on a call this morning with the network in the US and Canada. There's people from California, New York, Wisconsin, all over the place. And the earliest model is in California, Northern California, and in Sonoma County, where jurisdiction was facing a large build for gas station. But since then, they're having regional conversations as well at the full county level and with others, and that's going pretty well. And they've now wrote a best practice kind of manual for the entire state of California, because there's a lot of questions around how we can defossilize and phase out fossil fuel use. So I thought I would bring it to the board because you're all representative of municipalities, and in preparation for today, I did go through the zoning bylaw of each of your municipality to try to get a sense of how permissible putting in a gas station is. I think for all three, you are very permissible in the sense that no new gas stations in many of your zones require a public hearing. Courtney, as service station definition, we also all call this a different service station, the sale of motor fuels. In Courtney, it's allowable in 4 zones, in the multiple use zone 5, and commercial 1, and commercial 2, comprehensive development. In the Comox, you allow gas station without public hearing or otherwise in 7 zones. You have actually Comox got the unique thing of having a zone specific to gas bars, but also 6 others. And in Cumberland is the most permissive one. It's got 8 zones, commercial, general, village core, light industrial, heavy industrial, and then 4 different interchange mixed use zones. So overall, we don't stand out. I think most municipalities and local government are fairly permissible around North America around that. And this initiative aims to try to change that. So I'm here to encourage you, if you have the appetite, to think about whether you want to go back to your council and think about whether it's time to update some of your bylaws. Again, this is about making it a little harder to establish new gas stations without affecting existing ones. I'll be happy for any comments.
Thank you, Director. And Director Grieve.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Well, what we heard at FCM, at least some of the sessions, was around the fact that policies are basically developed by urban centers and are not necessarily a good fit in rural and remote communities. In fact, we also heard around the table that many of these bylaws have unexpected consequences. In fact, I would say that there's a possibility this may have the exact opposite effect, in that somebody at Plateau Road or somebody on Mount Washington would have to drive all the way to Courtenay to fill up gas before taking off to Victoria. So it's a little different in the rural areas. That being said, I do realize that there's an MOU on Highway 19 that prohibits any gas stations or restaurants or anything of that sort, except for the Village of Cumberland, which got an exemption. Also, the fact that Comox First Nation, or any First Nation for that matter, could possibly be totally exempt from any of this moratorium and could build something on, say, the Mount Washington Parkway. So, you know, it's symbolic, and I recognize that. And, you know, heading into an election, that's very important. I think that there's some people in my area that would probably argue the fact that if ever a place needed a gas station, it probably would be Mount Washington, because people arrive there with an empty gas tank, having only seen the very last gas station in the news before they got there. And also, that being said, there's probably very little appetite for any entrepreneurs to open gas stations these days anyway. And on further inspection, of course, Area C, we only have, I think, three zones. And I believe 3 or 4 zones, and I believe 3 of them already have gas stations. So it doesn't preclude a gas station in the rural areas, but of course it would have to go to public hearing for rezoning. Now that's all very, very good, but you know, rather than taking a stick, you know, we should try offering carrots sometimes. I think that possibly, you know, gas stations should offer level 3 charging so that people have a place they can pull into and, you know, fill up their coffee and drain their family and recharge their vehicle. So also understand that that right now we have bylaws that prohibit the dispensing and selling of hydrogen, which is probably going to be the #1 fuel of the future. So we're lagging behind on some things here. I'm going to vote. I did vote for it, of course, because, like I say, obviously, for Area C residents, there's no real change because we'd have to go to rezoning anyway for this. But I just thought I'd bring that up because, as I say, at FCM, I heard quite a lot of talk about the fact that it's going to be different. Transition is going to be a lot more difficult in remote and rural communities. It's just the nature of the beast. And also, as I was saying to Director Morin, you know, I mean, this also, the way we're going on this is going to impact people with, you know, people without means, because not everybody can afford you $80,000, $100,000 car. People are driving around in beaters right now, trying to get to work and so forth and feed their family. So it's gonna be a little bit of a different transition in, I think, than we do anticipate. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to Director Arbor for bringing this forward and spending the time to help educate the board on how service stations and filling stations are treated in our different jurisdictions. As everyone here is aware, City of Courtenay has been working on a new OCP for most of this term, which is currently, I guess next Monday is our public hearing on it. And what will come out of that is a long phase of implementation in which we look at all of our zoning bylaws and their permitted uses. And I think what's proposed in this report fits in very well with that. We have a climate-focused OCP, and looking at service stations from their land use impacts makes perfect sense from the public benefit, or in terms of public benefit. Service stations have a different type of impact on the surrounding area than a restaurant, which would also fit into the same type of zoning. So I think in the process of updating our zoning bylaws, this will inevitably come up. Additionally, probably drive-throughs would also fall into that category. They were also identified in our OCP as something that should be considered for limitation going forward. They also have a big impact on the area around them just because of the demands on the traffic demands that are associated with both of those land uses. The other thing that isn't in the report that is worthy of consideration when it comes to additional filling stations is that over the course of their use, inevitably they become brownfield sites, which has a negative impact on the community. It's lost tax revenue, it's unsightly, and it has negative environmental impacts. And that is also something that's not really considered in outdated zoning. So I think that this has a lot of merit. There's other communities that have adopted this. I believe Gibson's has their own exclusive zoning for filling stations or service stations. And I would hope that that's where we'll land in the next few years. But in terms of proposing zoning changes in the short term, we've identified a few zoning changes that we can implement before the end of the term, and they're more focused around housing affordability. And there is a limitation on what we can hope to implement in a short amount of time, given staff constraints and just set staff capacity. So hopefully this will be addressed in the next few years. Thank you.
Director Mir.
Thanks, Chair. We had a great conversation on this topic at electoral area, so I'm not going to dive deep into some of the things that have already been discussed, but it was just a question as to, and maybe this is directed more to Director Arbor. We can have this discussion here, but I'm just wondering if we should maybe refer this to the municipality so that they can have a formal discussion at their own tables. And if that's something that Director Arbor would be open to.
Staff may be able to confirm. We were going to send a letter with this, so I don't know how you all treat your letters, if it hits their table or not, but I believe that's what we had planned to do.
Yep, Madam Chair, Jake has confirmed that yes, letter did go to the municipalities.
Yeah, so you can look in your mailbox at municipalities and it should be there, and it's whether you want to pull it up at your council.
Thank you. Director Morin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in favor of exploring this for sure. When I look at the number of gas stations that we have throughout the main more urban areas, including Cumberland, gas stations in Cumberland may have now surpassed the number of bars because several bars have closed down there. So I think we've got, enough gas stations. I don't see for existing use and future use. And I don't know if that was part of your analysis in terms of, do we need more? Now I see Director Greaves' point about areas where there are no gas stations like Mount Washington. that's sort of up in the air. Wanted to correct though, there is a gas station closer than Nanoose because there's one in Area A, just off the highway in Buckley Bay. I've often gone in there on fumes, but so there is one that people going to Mount Washington can utilize. So yeah, I mean, I think just by those points, I just think that it is worth exploring, and I'm in favor of exploring it further. Thanks.
Thank you. And yes, oh, sorry, Director Cole-Hamilton, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much, Chair, and thanks, Danielle, for bringing us to the table today. I just wanted to echo, I think, some of the land use issues that the Councillor McCollum was addressing. That I think that the risks and expenses associated with filling stations at this point, given their very short lifespan, make this sort of zoning restriction, I think, a sensible one on a number of levels, including the climate aspect. Although I would have to say that in terms as a driver of behavior change and in terms of climate change and in terms of EV adoption, it's generally tended to be, as far as I can tell from looking at other jurisdictions like Norway, it tends to be a combination of improved charging infrastructure and economic incentives of various kinds that seem to actually drive that kind of wide-scale change. And I mean, a note that that preparing the rural areas for that transition to EV technology was part of what this is all about. And I would like to see us thinking a bit more about some of the carrots as well, which have been the successful methods in other places. And in the mobility primer, which we looked at our last meeting, there were, I think, 5 different policies related to increasing EV adoption. And I know that that primer is going to form a basis for a discussion at the RGS Technical Advisory Committee table. And I'm glad to see that as a template that's going to be discussed by the communities in CBRD. And I'm just wondering, just to follow on that, whether the path forward for the CBRD, what will be the path forward for the CBRD in assessing and potentially adopting some of the those incentives suggested in the mobility primer, which I think probably in the end will be a much more effective means of promoting the adoption of electric vehicles. So while I will be supporting it, I would like to get a sense of where we're likely to go with those carrots and the incentives in the mobility primer.
I think that's a question to staff.
Madam Chair, if I could just ask Alana Mullally, General Manager of Planning and Development, whether she has information to share on that question.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. Director Cole-Hamilton, I think this is one of the pieces that we need to discuss at that technical advisory committee. What is the best role for local government, both at the regional district level as well as municipal level, to respond with some carrots to incentivize that behavior change? I think we're pretty early days yet, but I hope that if you'll stay with us, we'll be able to roll that out with your staff as well.
I hope to be staying with you. Whether that happens after October 15th is a question that I can't decide. But I'm really glad. I'm glad to hear that there's going to be a robust discussion of the incentives and the building out of the charging network, things which have shown time and again to be the real drivers of EV adoption. And I think that notwithstanding, I think that I'll certainly be supporting Director Arbor's resolution. I appreciate him bringing it to the table. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and as Cumberland's representative, I see no problem bringing it to our table to discuss. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of downside to not having petroleum filling stations as a permitted use. If you remove that, all the current gas stations get to stay, they get to maintain their businesses, and they just become legally non-conforming. I I think where the benefit is that if another gas station wants to be developed, then they have to go through the rezoning process, which of course has a lot of public input through public hearing. And so it's not that they can't be developed, it's just that there needs to be further discussion and input from the community around it. And I think that's a good way to go at this point. So I will be having this discussion at Cumberland Council, and it likely will get pushed to our OCP process. That's going to be happening next year as well, but certainly worthwhile discussion. And I don't see any further lights, so I will. Is there a, no, it's just an item for receipt, so we're on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to reports, and we have Brenda Lee's portion, Black Creek Oyster Bay Service Committee. Grant and Arbor, thank you. And they've moved receipt of the minutes from May 26th. Is there any discussion around those minutes? Director Lee.
I just wanted to ask, you know, if I could reconsider staying for the in-camera and just give my tacit approval to the resolution that may be coming up there, and just, can I do that?
Question to staff, hold on.
Jake, if you could comment whether the single director that's involved in that service could continue and accept the recommendations.
Thank you, Russell, through the chair. Yes, so the recommendation can be moved and seconded for ratification and then voted on by the single director. That would still be party and present for this meeting.
Okay, I'd like to do that, please. I'm not feeling very well, so I'd like to sort of get that done.
Okay, Director, we'll do that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Okay. See you later. I'll see you next time. CSWM.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Okay, so we still are on the minutes. All in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And we're on to the Comox Valley Emergency Program Administrative Committee minutes from May 12th. Grant and Arbor, thank you. Any further discussion? Director Hamir, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to first of all say I had the great opportunity of unveiling the newest Fire Smart community in the Comox Valley on Alder Grove. It was a fantastic neighborhood program. Lots of the neighbors came out, and I noted that in the minutes of this committee that there is now the neighborhood emergency program documents that are now public facing. They've been published as of, they will be as of the end of this month. But I noticed that recruitment's not going to be happening until, forward into November. And, we'll lose a whole season to not kind of recruit. I'm thinking summer season, where there's festivals and farmers markets and opportunities to engage with the public. So I was just wondering if there was a possibility of moving that, having some more events for staff to come and meet with public face to face and really talk up the new resource that we have.
Madam Chair, we'll definitely give that some consideration, but the service is just challenged a little bit with the managing the fracture on the 5th, the training and preparation for that exercise that is happening in the early fall period. But we'll definitely give that some consideration if it is possible. But that's kind of what's directing more of a robust response to this action later in the year than now.
Okay, great. I was just wasn't sure if there was something else that was kind of preventing staff. If it's just capacity, then that's understood. But would love to see more, if possible, more engagement on this. Thanks.
Good point. Thank you. All right, so we're on the minutes. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So we're on to advisory group on reconciliation. Hillian and Grant, thank you. I'll pass it to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Christiane Wild, Senior Manager of, pardon me, it's been a long day. Senior Manager of Strategic Initiatives is here to present this report and introduce our guests.
Thank you through the chair. I'm pleased to introduce to you today the concept of the advisory group on reconciliation and the next steps to recruit, structure, and establish this group that we envision will bring together local government and the Indigenous community to move forward together on reconciliation. Reconciliation generally refers to both learning and actions, and the work that we're proposing to do through the advisory group will help us to learn, acknowledge, and raise awareness about the impacts of colonialism in the Comox Valley, and put us on the path to building relationships with the Indigenous community that are based on respect and collaboration and without presupposing outcomes. Working together as local governments will enable a consistent approach that respects the sensitivity of this work and ensures that local governments are reaching out to the Indigenous community as reconciliation advisors, but not to do the work that is our responsibility as settlers. It can also address some of the resource and capacity issues for all organizations by working together, as opposed to having several different initiatives and touch points. This work is not intended to replace our government-to-government relationship with Comox First Nation. The CBRD and municipal councils have established their own processes to engage with Comox on issues of shared interest, and that work will continue. Today, you'll hear from our consultants, Nick Chowdhury and Sonora Morin, who are very experienced in this type of work, and they're here to share with you the approach they're going to undertake to build an advisory group. Through collaboration, they'll seek to obtain agreement on the objectives, structure, and terms of reference for this committee. Nick and Sonora, welcome. Thank you for being here and guiding us through this important work.
There we go. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Christiane. My name is Nick Chowdhury. You may have met my bio, but I don't know all of you. I do know a couple of you. Member of the Dena'ina First Nation. I was born here in the territory of the Comox First Nation. I consider many of them, well, we have a lot of family ties. A lot of them are friends, and many of us have working history as well. My family, our territory, is the upper end of Knight Inlet on the mainland, opposite the north end of the island. I share this work with Sonora. Do you want to do a quick intro?
Thank you. I am Sonora Morin Thompson, and I've been a settler here in the Campbell River area, the territory of the Liquidtaw people for the last 14 years. And I was raised in the territories of the Tolkien, and my family lived in the territories of the Mi'kmaq, where we were the Acadian families of French. And I have been working with Nick now for 14 years and doing governmental work for the last 25 years. So thanks for having me.
Welcome.
All right. I'm glad to be here to share some insight and some reminders into what we're doing. And for us, taking a look back at your 2021 report, we have a quote there. It's important to include Indigenous communities for their perspectives in decision-making processes related to moving forward in reconciliation. Now, this is something we can't just jump into. We all know the size and the amount of work that this can be, the time that's already been spent on the relationship with the Comox First Nation and working on the reconciliation journey to bring us to this point. So before we get started, we're going to spend some time preparing some introduction materials, identifying and contacting potential participants. And we really want to look at the importance of getting that buy-in. We need to share a perspective of what this can and will be that will gain the support and engagement of those participants, rather than just saying, here's the plan, here's how we're going to do it, and our first meeting's on this date. we're going to actually build a lot of those pieces together through an engagement framework that will include communications and more as needed. Participants will also be working on spending that time building the relationships. This is what we've seen together in our work in the past that builds strong groups, be they committees, networks, organizations. And as I said, building on your work to date, we've taken a look through the corporate plan. We've got the key driver in 2019, 2022, where you say that Indigenous relations, we are committed to reconciliation and rebuilding relationship relationship building with Indigenous people. So I've talked a bit about how we want to invest the time to build it right. For us, this is looking at key components: safe space, trust, alliances, communication, and really where I started relationship. We didn't plan an introduction, and I thought, as I was sitting here with Sonora waiting, that I do only know a couple of you, and I look forward to knowing you better. The relationship is really key for all of this to be meaningful. We have a rough timeline here started, working on introductory materials, contacting participants or potential participants. We're there now, kind of working between the two of those main bullets. We want to start planning meetings and create the engagement plan, moving ahead. Then we get to, I think, the part that some of what I would imagine the board might find a little more exciting, but looking at identifying some potential projects and then getting those planned, and actually to that point where we're seeing the outcomes, we're seeing the benefits of having this committee in place. We did get, as was provided and discussed, a list of potential participants, and we were asked, is there more? Is there anyone we're missing? Is there anyone that we should be considering? So we've added some here. And I believe you all have copies of this. I'm not going to go read through the list name by name. One point I guess I would add in terms of this potential table of participants, I'm on the leadership team for the Comox Valley Community Health Network. So those of you that have sat here long enough, I would have presented probably 3 or so years ago with the coordinator. Just an update, we asked to share in the presentation. And looking back at that time, since then, I also represented the Community Health Network at a leadership meeting down here in, was it the museum? Yeah, I think so. But that led me to think, outside of Indigenous participants, are there any others like who met in that leadership meeting for the Comox Valley that could be involved on a longer term basis? Not necessarily every single meeting, but that meeting I believe happened once a year. There's a lot more connections that we can consider through experiences and the perspectives of things like the Community Health Network that broaden our awareness of who, what, and where is going on around us. So I look forward to making sure that we keep communications working and up to date, on track with this plan. Thank you.
All right, are you open to questions?
Certainly.
Okay, great. So to the board, are there any questions? I see Director Arbor has a slide on.
Thank you for coming and presenting. And I thought the report, the staff report was also quite good and clear, but leaving some places for discussion, I guess, around what we could expect and how we're going to build a group, because the report talks about that on our end, it could be staff and or elected officials. So of course that piqued my interest in terms of what that might look like, and also thinking about whether it was written in that fashion to perhaps ask the First Nation participants who they would like at the table from our side. I was wondering if that was part of the intent, why this was left like that. So just so you know, so we can understand that and/or comment.
It's a good point to recognize. And yes, it is. It's meant to be open and inviting to the collaboration of the participants, especially Comox First Nation. I've seen so many times in the past, and I joked about it already, we don't come to the table or set up the meeting invitation and say, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, and here's why you're invited. The other perspective that I wanted to be very mindful of is that Comox or any of the board here may at some point, looking at this as we start out, realize that, as I envision it, there is going to be a period of work where we're looking at what does the engagement plan look like? What does communications look like? And for many of the participants, that's going to be a place where, hey, I'd like to send this person and this person from our staff. And then as we start getting into engagement and project planning, depending on what the engagement plan looks like, there'll be opportunity for that and/or to really become defined and a little more reflective of where we are.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense to me. And a couple of weeks ago, I was Lisa helps retiring Mayor Victoria was giving a presentation where she was talking about them forming a group a little bit like this, but that with the First Nation, they ended up saying, you know, we operate as families. So then she said they're calling themselves a family for that advisory group. And then she went back to her staff, and her staff were like, we're a family? Like they were like, what do we do now? But apparently they've been operating now for 2 or 3 years in that fashion. And so I welcome a different approach definitely to how, as you described earlier, is more like the government-to-government relationship that we currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Mira, you're next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to both of you, Nick and Sonora. I've had the opportunity of doing some cultural training with both of you, so I look forward to this process as it starts to unveil itself. So a couple of questions to you. Looking at the list of potential partnerships, I noted that it was quite a geographically wide, and I'm just wondering if that could lead to any kind of tension between different nations, inviting nations that are not strictly within the territory. Is that considered culturally appropriate, or like are we potentially being I'm just wondering if those nations would even want to participate in something in this territory, and if there might be tensions with others who are here. I don't know if you've got comments.
That's a great observation, and that would be part of our job to work through. I've imagined this scenario in different situations, and you could certainly be inviting tensions. But however, at the same time, I've also worked with government bodies who have been so inclusive, so open door, nothing's planned yet, that at some point someone has to step in, and that's what we'll do, is figure out where this works, where this doesn't. Some obviously will be just happy to be notified that it's going on. Thank you very much. I'll watch for updates.
Nice. And just one comment, and this just sort of popped into my head now, in terms of participants, we are always trying to figure out as elected officials how we engage youth in the work that we do. And I'm wondering if this advisory might have an opportunity. We do have through SD 71 a few options of engaging with Indigenous youth as well, and if that's potentially an area that could bring in young people to, anytime young people get involved in any kind of political process or advisory process, I always get excited, probably more so than they, but I would love to see that if that's possible. Thanks.
That's a great idea, and I kind of was trying to find a way to put it together myself with the intention of adding Sassaman Society to the list. They are a Indigenous service provider here in the Valley. They're based in Campbell River, their main office. But here in the Valley, they have actually a family and youth coordinator. So where I can, I look to find those connections where we can reach people who aren't normally engaged as much. One of the other groups I think of as well is elders. I thought to reach out to the Saskman's Elder Navigator because there's elders as well.
Thank you. Dr. Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. And Nick, we had the opportunity to work together on the development of the coordinating circle for the Community Health Network. So it's good to see you again. And I appreciate that both of you are involved in this process. It's no small undertaking. But I really do appreciate your comments in relation to Director Hamir's question. I know that there are groups from outside the area who will not necessarily want to be involved, but will appreciate being approached. I think there also may be opportunities to reach out to people in the community who are not necessarily engaged. Because as we know, there are far more Indigenous people here who are not affiliated with the Comox Nation than are. And of course, you've got the Indigenous Sharing Society in Wache that I believe will help in that regard. But sadly, we have an unhoused population. I know that they have some outreach services, and I would hope that there might be some consideration given to attempts to inform and engage there to some extent if possible. But I was wondering what you visualize in terms of the time commitment that you're going to be asking of people who do choose to participate. You do note in here that you have to take account of organizational capacity, and we certainly know that Comox, for one, gets asked to take part in all sorts of things where they simply don't have the capacity to spend that time. So I'm wondering what sort of a commitment you're looking for. And I did note that you're envisioning that there would be some type of fee for participation, similar to what happens with us when we attend a meeting. So I think that's a good incentive. It obviously makes it recognize that the service is of value and is not being taken for granted. But just how do you visualize the time commitment that you're going to be asking of people in this process?
Well, I have a vision that I'd like to share with the participants as we come together to start planning the engagement plan, and that will look longer term into how that works. What I'm envisioning is kind of a blended engagement where those that have the higher capacity and time and resources can come together to do some of the planning work in that project phase, if you will, but that there is a scheduled regular interval where those that don't have the capacity or have the busier schedules can then come in and get that hands-on, okay, this is where we are. I understand now where we're going, and leave it at that point where those individuals don't have to be at every meeting, so that we can build flexibility for those capacities.
Thanks for that. And I look forward to getting to know both of you. And I really appreciate how much you've stressed the relationship aspect. I think we found at the board and the engagement that we've been working on this past few years, particularly with the Comox Nation, that the relationships that are built as part of the process go a huge distance in helping to make the other parts of the work together successful. So, thank you.
Yeah, and looking at the timeline, I actually felt some comfort. This recommendation that comes out of our Indigenous Relations Reconciliation Assessment to form this group, and the timeline obviously goes well beyond our election period, and that's always a concern when you're talking about relationships. And I took some comfort in that there's continuity there in forming this group, and I appreciate all the effort that will go into its composition. But it does give me comfort that there is going to be some continuity there. Thank you. Oh, Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. I forgot to mention that You mentioned projects, and I've been very keen on a particular project, which I won't go into detail about, but I want to just acknowledge that, we've been keen to do some of these things for several years. And I credit Christiane for convincing me that it was more important that we set up a proper process and do this in a good way than that we actually try and get a project done. So, so I will acknowledge that, but I also look forward to floating my ideas with you at some point.
I look forward to it as well. One of the things that I'd love to see is a spot where we can just start containing these ideas and planning that. Continuity is fully intentional in this. With so much that I do, strive to build something that's going to live beyond each of us sitting in these chairs. We don't have a choice when we're taken out of them sometimes. So if we're going to build something, build it so that it lasts.
Wonderful, thank you. And I don't see any further lights. And so we're on receipt, there is no motion. So all in favor of receipt? Any opposed? Thank you very much. And thank you to both Nick and Sonar. Okay, moving on. We are on item 4, the statement of financial information for 2021. Grant and Armour, thank you, and I'll pass it to staff.
Thank you, Chair and Directors, and Katie Pell, Manager of Financial Operations, will present the report and answer any of your questions.
Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, and good afternoon through the chair to the directors. The statement of financial information for the year ended December 31st, 2021 is being provided today for approval. This is an annual requirement, so the statement may look familiar to members of the board from review in prior years. As required by the Local Government Act and the Community Charter, the statement of financial information includes the audited financial statements, the schedule of remuneration and expenses for elected officials, the schedule of employee remuneration and expenses for those employees earning greater than $75,000 a year, the schedule of severance agreements, the schedule of payments to suppliers for goods and services totaling more than $25,000 each, and the schedule of guarantee and indemnity payments. You'll see in the schedules that the regional district spent $99 million on payments to suppliers compared to $120 million in 2020. And $18 million on remuneration compared to $16 million in 2020. This was spent in order to maintain and enhance service levels during the year. The large decrease in supplier payments is primarily due to the completion of the water treatment plant in 2021. I'll also note that the financial statements that are included in this package are the same financial statements that were approved by the board on May 10th of this year. Once approved, the signed report will be posted on the CVRD website and forwarded to the province, completing the 2021 financial filing requirements. And I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And to the board, do you have any questions on the SOFI? Dr. Arbour.
Yeah, thanks for the work. And yeah, I guess the water treatment plant has really skewed our capital expenditure and contractor expenses the last couple of years. So I know when we look at the financial plan moving forward, we usually sit at the 70, 80, I guess, million in operation, and you're saying 18 million of that is direct staff expenses. Is that correct?
Correct. So the total spent on remuneration, so personnel costs in the 2021 fiscal year was 18 million.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further lights and online. No. Okay, so we are on receipt. I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. And there is a recommendation. Grant and Arbour, thank you. So that the 2021 statement of financial information for the CVRD be approved. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Okay, we're on to item 5, Director's Annual Reports from January 1st to December 31st, 2021. Grant and column. And are there any director's reports?
Madam Chair, 5 and 6 are really the same, and item number 6, well, attached as the item under number 5 is the individual director's reports. This is also the opportunity for any director to provide a verbal report or update as well.
Right. But the next item is the updates on our external appointments. So are there any questions for any of the directors on their report? Okay, so then it's just a motion to receive. Well, oh, Director Hamir, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Kettler. I was just wondering if Director Arbor wouldn't mind giving a verbal about FCM, because I know that happened recently and probably since we sent in these reports. So just some, a summary, that would be great.
Director Arbor?
Thank you. And for item 6, I was thinking I would do it later because there's the other 2 appointments I have. There'll be more material issues, so I'll probably report back in August or September. Thanks for raising FCM. Director Grieve and I attended for the rural areas. Who else was there? Oh yeah, Director Cole Hamilton online as well. And he had actually a pretty full charge. He was managing a climate caucus meeting as well. It was really good last week in Regina. It was the first big comeback in person for everybody. I was happy to be reelected as part of the BC caucus on the board. And FCM, again, just what a great organization, so much capacity. I'll remind the board, like they have 200 staff. It's like, when you think of that, not a lot of people think that. And we'll be heading into advocacy this fall with new priorities. I think the COVID economic recovery thematic is starting to wear off. So now the beginning of discussions about what do we really want to do in the future as all the municipalities in Canada. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, we're on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. And we're on to director's updates on external appointments. Any motion to receive? Mir and Arbor, thanks. And are there any verbal updates from directors? Director Arbor.
Okay, I'll just give a preview of what we're dealing with, but with the Island Corridor Foundation, it is crux time. Last time I did a report, we had 18 months, and now we're down to about 11 or 10 months before the right of reversal could happen. So at FCM, we actually started to try to connect with the Minister, Dominique LeBlanc of Infrastructure and Communities, and have requests for much greater help with our chair, Aaron Stone, and from the federal government. So I think I'm hopeful. And by the way, an important note, Charlene Everson is now vice chair of ICF. So she got elected at our AGM as the vice chair. So I'm hoping to get Aaron and Charlene to Ottawa to actually go and take some more meaningful meetings in the future. And at library, I would report that a really hard meeting this weekend where probably like the regional district, a lot of our quotes for builds and renovations are coming way over. So actually this weekend, we made a renovation to suspend a renovation project for the Alberni branch. And it's unknown. We haven't made a decision about Courtney yet. So we are seeing just quotes that are really high in the marketplace. And so there's a pause currently on moving forward with some of these projects. We'll do our budget this summer. So that's why I said in September, I think we'll have a clearer picture about how we're going to move with capital, including the Courtney branch. Thanks.
Thank you, Director. I guess I am appointed to the Island Coastal Economic Trust. And I think what we'll be seeing soon at the board here is a strategy around recapitalization of that trust. So that's stay tuned for that. We'll be seeing it soon. Okay, any further discussion? Ron, Director Grieve, go ahead.
Well, I guess I could. The Comox Valley or Restorative Justice Committee, a society. Doug Hillian is one of the lead headhunters on this, but as you probably know, Bruce Curtis is retiring, a long-serving CO. And so we're right now trying to attract some interest out there. You may have seen advertisements in the paper. I don't know, it's going to be like pulling teeth, putting a help want us sign out in the window or something, but maybe Doug could fill us in on where we're at on that. Also, we did have a session, very helpful, where we basically redefined our mission statement, and we've pretty well got that ironed out now too. And not so much a new direction, but basically defining the direction and what community justice is really all about. But I don't know if Doug wants to put on the hot seat, but have we had any applicants to date for the position?
Oh, thank you. Director Hillian.
Yeah, thanks to Director Grieve. I am on the committee at the Justice Center that is involved in recruiting a new executive director for the organization. And at this point, I don't actually know if any applications have come in, but we'll be hearing about that in the next week or so. And we are hoping to have some people to interview during the latter part of the month of July. And are hoping to actually hire somebody by the early fall so that there can be a transition before Bruce Curtis steps down in the latter part of this year. Thanks.
Thank you. And I actually remembered that there was with the Island Coastal Economic Trust was fairly big event in Lynn Roberts' retirement. And the hiring of Brody, but I forget his last name, but I will have it for you at the next meeting. Director Cole-Hamilton, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, there's a motorcycle going by. I just wanted to make a brief report on my appointment to the Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities Climate Leadership Plan. There's actually be a small request from the group coming to the CPRD, which I just received and I'll be bringing forward at the next meeting. But it essentially, as I've briefed before in the past, it's work to build a region-wide climate plan, and began with an in-depth territorial analysis and then a survey of government officials, elected officials and staff, which had a remarkably high response rate. And we've brought those together and then gone on to do a further round of engagement with both youth and with Indigenous nations in the territorial area, the Vancouver Island coastal community area. And the final stage will be placing that all together in a final report. As I said, there's a small request for funding that I received from the chair, Mayor Helps, and I'll anyway, table that and bring that to next week's meeting. But that's just a sense of what's been going on with the climate leadership plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say that I always appreciate seeing these reports and hearing what directors are up to and the various outreach activities that go on. I think there's a lot of fine work that goes on. those of us who serve municipally don't necessarily, the reports don't necessarily capture what we do there, but we do have an opportunity through each month at our council meetings to report on all of our engagement at the community, which I think is quite extensive in the case of some of us who don't necessarily have full-time jobs that we have to go to apart from these duties. But I just really appreciate the engagement that all of the directors have beyond simply coming to these meetings. Thanks.
Well said. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any further hands or lights. So I'll call the question. All in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? And that's carried unanimously. And that brings us to item 7, the 2022 CVRD corporate plan. Grant and McCollum, thank you. And over to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and James Warren is here to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Russell. Am I on mute? I don't know how to unmute. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Russell, and good afternoon, directors. Thank you for the opportunity to make a very brief presentation. I'm pleased to report that we have just published the 2022 corporate plan on our website, and it is also attached to the staff report on today's agenda. The corporate plan illustrates the work of the regional district with a particular focus on our core services and how your strategic drivers are influencing the projects and activities being undertaken. I'll walk through a few aspects of the plan, but want to emphasize how integral your strategic planning process has been to guide the services that we deliver to the Comox Valley. Each year, you as CVRD directors take the time to reflect on the important pressures and opportunities facing your constituents. The strategic planning sessions then dig into the core services of the CVRD, and you hear about operational requirements and the ways in which we are delivering potable water or building new parks and greenways. We also try to enhance our collective understanding of the regional district structure, which is unique to BC, and as a result means that the Comox Valley Regional District is one of less than 30 similar organizations in the entire world. And considering the specific arrangement of services, communities, and partnerships in the Comox Valley, we are truly one of a kind. One special aspect of your strategic planning process is that you've defined 4 strategic drivers. Using these important topics, we're working hard to deliver our public services in ways that reflect upon those drivers, whether that be budgets that are built within the fiscal means of our communities or advancing reconciliation through the advisory group that you've heard about earlier this evening. Your drivers are applied to all of our projects. The corporate plan goes further to list out where key initiatives are putting stronger emphasis on certain drivers. As noted, the corporate plan is a high-level overview that illustrates the core services, setting out key service outcomes for each, and articulating some of the different activities that we undertake. Did you know, for example, that we treat enough water to fill more than 3,500 Olympic-sized swimming pools each year? It's a nod to Chris and the new water treatment plant. The plan also touches on the achievements from 2021 and goals for 2022. Last year, we saw several projects completed, including upgrades to odor control at the sewage treatment plant and a new high-speed internet service on Denman and Hornby Islands. And in 2022, a focus is on planning for the future of recreation facilities, infrastructure to Union Bay and Royston, and increasing our resilience in the face of emergencies. To close, we are looking ahead to the next term of office following the local government elections in October. And building on your work through strategic planning over the past term, we're anticipating that we'll continue to focus on the CVRD's core services and identification of strategic drivers that guide our service delivery. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the time this evening, and I would be pleased to respond to any questions on the corporate plan or the strategic planning process.
Great, thanks, James. Are there any questions? Director Arbour.
Thanks. What a great report. And just confirming, do we print a few copies of that for safety?
We don't typically, be mindful of
budget,
minimizing our footprint and budget and whatnot.
I might put in a request by email or something. Good one. Sorry, there's chatter in the back. So, no, I was just thinking, you're reflecting on our term, and I know it's not the day to do it. We'll do that in September. But, you know, as we're looking at the strategic drivers, how well they held through a deeply changing environment, through a pandemic, through so much insecurity. And I think, yeah, I'm just stunned that we selected those 4 drivers in a very different time, and yet they really applied through all of that and would continue to do so. I don't know if you're the same as me. I'm a little fingers crossed about next term, about how the next board will come together. I am concerned about how bright or how difficult the next number of months might become as we struggle with stagflation, possible recession, households that are stretched, inflationary pressure. I think it's, you would think after the term we had that things are only going to get better, but I just hope so. Anyways, the report is great, and I think it speaks really well to all the initiatives and also the human side of our work, both at staff, elected officials, and community partners. So well done on presenting our organization upward.
Thank you. Director Hamir.
Well, thanks, Chair. And thanks to all the staff that were involved in putting this together. I've always loved the corporate plans. The infographics, I think, are fantastic and make for a really great sharing opportunities in terms of, I mean, I wasn't going to ask for a printed copy, but what I was going to ask is if our communications plan might, and I think we've done this in the past where we've put out sections of the corporate plan because it's so easily digestible. And I know I don't want it to come off as electioneering, but I think it helps to explain the work that local government does. So I think if we kept it to that level, exactly the data that you just supplied about how much clean water that we treat, the things that we do, I'd love to see more of the corporate plan make it onto our social media platform, just so that, again, we're informing residents of the work that regional district does. So thanks.
Thanks. We actually, we have a companion video that I was not going to show tonight. But it does identify much of what's in the corporate plan, and we would promote that through social media. So I'll make that note.
Great. Director Gillian.
Thanks, Chair. My compliments to staff on the production of this. I think it serves the organization really well. Particularly impressed with the pictures. And it captures a moment in time. There's one with the vast majority of us at the opening of the water treatment plant, and we're all masked. Yeah, many people's smiles are radiating through. I'm just wondering, is there a copyright on these, or are we allowed to take excerpts and use them for our own purposes later on?
The corporate plan it's really trying to tell our story. So I would encourage it to be used widely and to share that story.
Yeah, I think from the feedback, you can see that it's well received. It's really a celebration of our accomplishments and the good work that we do as staff and board and community in general, actually. So yeah, that's really, really wonderful to see. Director Grave.
Yes, thanks, Chair. You know, we don't blow our own trumpet near enough. It's been a very tough term for everybody. Director Arbor is talking about the next term. Well, you never know what's coming around the bend, that's for sure. And it's not what you think it is. It's something you didn't expect at all. But I have to say that, you know, that with the group we got right now, and especially the chair and the way she's handled herself through this ordeal, this pandemic. I remember, you know, waiting to dial in that first March of COVID in 2020 and everybody on the line, you know, and then it was every day for a while, then it was every week, and then it just sort of petered out. But you know, it kept everybody together. It kept us strong. And we had to be strong because, you know, I mean, it's not just trite to say that we're leaders. We are the leaders. You know, we have to step up to that level. And I just want to commend everybody around this table for putting on their best face and being the leaders that they are. And come up May with the election, I don't think we could come up with a better group than we got right now. I think you guys all need a good pat on the back. You know, we don't always agree, but we agree to disagree and all the things we're supposed to do because we're not elected to be all of the same mind. That's really not beneficial. And we've accomplished a lot. I mean, just look at it at this little presentation. I don't think the general public are quite aware, you know, of the great work the staff does to make us look this good. So thank you for making us look good in an election year.
Thanks so much, Director Reeves, and caught me a little off guard there with the rare praise. But thank you so much. And yes, I agree with the board and the staff's amazing work. So I don't see any further lights. And so we're on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you so much. And we're on to item 8, the administration. Oh, actually, I think I'll check in because we're 2 hours into the meeting. How are we feeling? Do we want a break now? Okay, we'll have a 10-minute break. So come back at 6:10. Thanks. Okay, we'll call everybody back to the table. So next we have item number 8, the Administration and General Government Services Budget Amendment, West Courtney Reservoir to Harmston Avenue Fiber Optic Network Project. Grant and Arbor, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Brian Pearson is here to explain this project and the reason for the budget amendment.
Good evening, through the CAO through the Madam Chair. So just a little bit of background, as in the report. This project was in the 2022 IT infrastructure capital. This project connects this building with West Courtney Reservoir, which you probably don't know because there's so many IT things that just go on in the background. But that for since 2005 has been a central point for connecting many of our remote sites, the sports center, the aquatic center. Now the new water treatment plant comes into that location, as well as the Comox Valley Waste Management Center. This project, now that we have a permanent location, essentially will connect that and provide our services to our remote sites in a better way by reducing many of our microwave links. There are still in the future a few more fiber optic projects to essentially eliminate the microwaves that connect our network, which have their issues, as I noted in the report. In times of inclement weather, they reduce their speed. They're dependent on multiple sites having power, so they do cause disruptions through our network. As of even last week, the aquatic center was shut down, or we had no phones and no IT at the aquatic center for about 2 hours until we resolved an issue there. This project was designed and estimated out by our fiber consultant back in September, going into the budget at $400,000. Then we had a very interesting winter and spring in the world of financial issues, and those have impacted this project, obviously, for the construction of it. And essentially, the project has come in at just under 441,000. So I'm looking for a budget amendment of $41,000 to continue and have this project begin in July.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Was there any questions? Director Arbor.
Sounds good. But while you're here, yes. I know we had a similar project to connect the Union Bay water treatment plant that's in the works.
Yes.
And I know that separately the community is approaching the providers, Shaw and I think it's Shaw. Is there any linkage between us and what the neighborhood is trying to do?
I think I was able to help the person direct them to Shaw.
Yeah.
We're held up with that right now because BC Hydro, who own the poles that Shaw put their cable on, are having a very rigorous approval process and I think it has to do with a few of the poles aren't meeting enough capability to carry that fiber, so they're having to replace a few. But yes, I did put the person on to the correct people in Shaw to see if there's, obviously Shaw builds out to bring in the Union Bay treatment plant. They will be able to also provide some connection to the areas.
That's great to hear. I was already going to vote in favor of the amendment, but now I'm going to vote it in a super way.
Okay, next we have Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Brian, for all the work that you do. I'm just curious, is there any opportunities to link up with City of Courtney systems, given the proximity that we share?
Yes, through Madam Chair. Part of this project, we are the City of Courtenay right now has an agreement we've been working with them on to essentially use 1 kilometer of their existing ductwork from the Public Works yard to this building. Their fiber optic duct comes right out to the crosswalk here. So yes, we're just, we have a meeting on Thursday to sort of finalize those pieces.
Great, and even better if you could help us figure out how to work the technology when we have our council meetings here.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't see any further lights and we're on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Arbor moves recommendation, Julian second. And that is to increase the budget by 41,000 for the project. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And next we have the Next Generation 9/11 Local Government Agreement. Billion and Grant, thank you. I'll pass it to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Directors, and Brian Pearson will introduce this report as well and answer your questions.
Thank you through the CEO and through the Madam Chair. You also probably, some of you will know my other role or my other hat I wear, and that's Deputy Secretary for North Island 911, which provides more than North Island with 911 services. And it's a group of 6 regional districts that own that corporation, and we are one of them, and actually the managing regional district. This kind of has nothing to do with 911, but it has to do with, it has nothing to do with North Island 911, but has a lot to do with 911. So this goes back to history. All of your municipalities will have gotten this agreement as well. TELUS has sent it to all local governments, and essentially there's 2 options. Either everybody signs it, or the regional district can sign on the behalf of all its members and member municipalities. So back in the 90s, again, we get to show our age, when we used to have 3 phone numbers on the fridge: police, ambulance, and fire. And obviously that caused many, I mean, that's how it was for a long time, well, ever. And it was causing issues, especially in metropolitan areas. And at that point in time, the CRTC looked at mandating a 911 service across Canada. I'll just give you a little more history about this. And in that, when it came to our regional district back then, it was decided that we go in with all the northern regional districts of North Island regional districts and develop the 911 corporation. So that was happening alongside as the first agreement that came from TELUS. And that agreement essentially just gives TELUS the allowance to take those 911 calls on behalf of our citizens and deliver them correctly to the correct downstream emergency service. So that you dial 911, it actually goes through the TELUS system, and then it initially goes to your primary answer point, which is for us ECOM now. And then ECOM just asks you that question: please fire ambulance, and then they choose to send that call to the appropriate downstream agency. So all that's happening on TELUS equipment. So hence the agreement that TELUS set up way back when, saying, okay, you're on our system. We're going to do this service for you as local government, provide that 911 call answer service. So at the regional district level, we began, I didn't even know, function 275, if you all knew that, it's one of those functions of those 99 functions, that is the 911 answering service for our regional district. And each of our 6 regional districts that owns North Island 911 has a 911 answering service. And so we take that money and run the North Island 911 Corporation. So in terms of handling our municipalities and our electoral areas in one service, that service provides for the 911 call. What's happened, we move ahead 20 plus years, the CRT has mandated the next generation 911. You can imagine that the old system was built on your old landline phone systems. Essentially, it's all copper wiring that runs the system, and it's running out of capacity to handle the calls. It's running out of capacity to have any capability to do anything more than just a call answering service. In other words, providing the emergency operators or providing the emergency services with more information, such as digital photographs or texting. Anything of those pieces, our existing system can't function. So over the last 6 years, I would say CRTC has mandated us to, by the year 2024, but essentially it's going to happen over the next year and a bit, that we move, or TELUS move all the systems to a digital-based system, and then we can be able to handle these calls. So it's not a easy switch. It's been going on in the background for the last probably 3 years. North Island 911, we started our work 2 years ago by putting all the pieces in. So guess what? TELUS now, well, it used to be BC Tel. Now TELUS comes back and essentially says, we need a new agreement with our local governments because we need information in a different capacity. We need GIS information from our local governments in terms of where those addresses are. We need it done accurately. Plus there's a whole bunch of other things about how they're going to handle that digital information and the privacy about all the bits and pieces that get passed on it. So this new agreement has come out. It's going to essentially every local government in BC. And like I said, it can either be signed at the regional district level where you have a 911 answering function. And there are a few other municipalities in BC that the municipality handles their own 911 function, and the regional districts, because they're so small, look after their own as well. In our case, we do have the 911 answer function, so it just makes it both prudent and probably easy for our member municipalities and for constituents for us to sign the agreement that we've been providing the service for the Comox Valley for the last 6 years now. Hopefully I didn't confuse too many people, but I'm open to questions.
It's quite a lot to chew on.
Yes.
We'll see. Dr. Hamir.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for that report. And, I'm going to convey some information, and I'm not sure if it's actually even applicable to here, but I just wanted, I would feel guilty not bringing it up. So I'm not sure if you've heard what happened in Northern BC recently with TELUS. I have friends in Smithers and in Prince George, where for quite a long time, it was more than a day, the entire network of cell service was taken out, and it was TELUS who was the provider. And just so you know, service went out from Prince George, Smithers, Kitimat, Haida Gwaii. It was a huge area, and EOCs, none of the cell service wasn't even available to the emergency services. And it turned out that TELUS, they cited a beaver had taken out an aspen pole that landed on aspen tree landed on one of their poles. But I guess because some of the cell service lines had connections via telephone poles. Yes. Anyways, so just a bit of concern. It kind of raised a flag for me that unintended consequences or unknown sort of weird idiosyncrasies around TELUS infrastructure, where we think that all of our cellular towers are independent, but they're actually interconnected by hard wires. And it just took one beaver to take out a certain line and everything went down for everybody. I mean, there was no opportunity to purchase, Interac. None of the banking and financial services was available. So kind of brought the northern economy to a halt. So just wanted to raise that, because when I saw this, I was like, I know we probably don't have an option, but I just needed to raise it. So thanks for listening to the story. And I don't know if you've got comments, but.
Through the chair, yes, I can comment on a few things. That TELUS actually did lose all their cellular service for a number of hours was it 2 weeks ago, Russ? We get notified of those, but it was only on TELUS's mobility or cell phones. In cases like that, for us as a 911 service, we notify our fire departments, and they essentially, there's an awareness campaign that quickly can go out to at least find a way to get the calls to the right people. Other things have happened in a bigger situation. But again, there is kind of a manual process that can happen. But I always call it, it's amazing how far we go with technology. We do have, and I'll call them thin threads. There are amazingly thin threads out there that engineers might not know, or they don't think of, or it's not in the plan, and they can literally take out systems. It's more the expectation. You have to know that can happen, and you have to have a business continuity plan to put those pieces back into place as fast as possible. It's actually more difficult here in countries in Africa and that have started with cell service. They are actually more resilient than us, that we've been based on these copper lines around our province, our country, because we've slowly migrated. Places that have gone into cellular directly, they don't have copper connecting or lines connecting their cell towers. They literally are in better shape for those type of situations than we are. Yes, that's one thing that's always in the back of our mind, is how do we do with that outage, and having a business continuity plan to handle that is part of sort of what North Island 911 does.
Okay. When I said it was a lot to chew on, I didn't even know about that beaver story. Foreshadowing there. All right. So I don't see any further lights. No further discussion. I'll call the question on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Director Hillian and Grant seconded. And the recommendation that we execute the next generation 9/11 local government service agreement. Is there any further discussion on the recommendation? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And moving on, we get to bylaws and resolutions. And first we have for final adoption. Number 1 is bylaw number 702, the Comox Valley Economic Development Service Conversion Bylaw Amendment number 2. Grant and McCollum move adoption. It's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried unanimously. And we're on to bylaws for first, second, and third reading. So I think we wanted to just move first reading. Is that correct?
No, just first.
Yeah, we'll ask Jake to come forward.
Far too technical for me. Jake Martins, could you please help out with the bylaw?
Oops.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, if the board is seeking to make any amendments to the bylaw, it'd be appropriate to give first reading to it as it currently stands, and then pass a resolution to amend the bylaw at that point. And then should that pass, then you would provide second reading as amended.
So I think because we don't, yes, we'll move first because we don't know if there will be an amendment. So Grant has moved first, seconded by Grieve. Okay, so it's up for discussion. Any further discussion? Majority, super majority, super majority. Okay, right now it has the super majority, which is the 2/3 or equivalent 6 votes. So that's what we're voting on now. Okay, I don't see any lights, so all in favor for first reading? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, we move that we amend it on 7D, change 2/3 to 75%.
Okay. So the amended motion, are you going to put it up?
Mhm. Yeah, you got to, yeah, 66.6%, 75.
That the voting structure be changed from the 67%
to 75.
to the 75% majority.
I don't think anyone seconded that.
Is there a second?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a second first before we discuss? Okay, McCullough.
Sorry.
Thank you. Director Morin to the amended motion.
Yeah, I just had a question about, we'd had an earlier discussion about taking the bylaw to councils. So I guess I'm wondering how the process works.
Yeah, and Jake can correct me if I'm wrong, but it needs to have third reading here, and then it goes back to the councils for a decision. Yes.
And then it can be amended from that, potentially?
Yeah, well, I guess they can either say yes or no to that motion, yeah, at their council.
So it doesn't come back for any more, it's a yes or no?
So once the bylaws begin third reading, then we would be sending it to the municipalities and electoral area directors for consent. So the yes or no. The board does have other options to forward the bylaw in advance of that, not to seek the consent, but certainly if the board is satisfied with the state of the bylaw at third reading, then it would be appropriate to send it there for consent. That would be the typical process we would follow, certainly. And that would also align with the timing that is evident with respect to seeking the consent from the participants and then forwarding it to the inspector of municipality should the required consent be received.
Thank you. Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'll speak against the amendment. I just find it odd that we go from one meeting on water where, we're scrambling to try to see if there can be some more balance and nobody controlling anything, to something that's like the other end of the spectrum where a couple of players can actually, stop the board from doing something. It's interesting that we're having those two conversations in the same day. And interestingly, I just realized that I and Dr. Grieve and Dr. Rosina each have a veto on this one right now, because if we don't vote for it and give electoral consent, then the bylaw, well, maybe you guys could proceed without one of us participants, I guess. So it's the first time in the term where I think as individual rural director, we have that veto on the bylaw, or at least more influence. No, I just see some scenarios. I think the 67 works for me. I think I see some scenarios, especially with potentially Courtney now getting the chance. So I could imagine a scenario where, say, a parcel is along a river, and in the rural areas wanted to go away a certain way, but Courtney wanted to go the other way. We came close to that, to be honest, under the RGS discussions even before this term. So I don't see the need for a super majority. So I'll just vote against it. Thank you.
Director Grant.
Yeah, so I guess our council does see the need. And if we don't make the change, then I'll be voting against if it goes to 66%, because, this is what our council had come up with after a lot of discussion to try and come up with something that would work for everybody. If it's not going to work that way, then I don't think we'll be in.
Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. So it's been about 2 hours since we talked about this earlier on with a lot of material intervening. So forgive me if I want to revisit a couple of things. Am I correct in understanding that what we're talking about right now is 9 individuals who would have a vote on a committee?
Yes.
And we're debating whether we require 6 votes or 7 votes for
6 or 3.
6 or 3, 6 or 7.
Right. Okay. 6 or 7.
Right. And I thought I heard 67%. Did I hear
Yes.
that?
Yes, that's what's currently in the bylaw is the 67%.
Well, where does 67% come in? Because 6 out of 9 is 2/3, which is, you round it up to 67. Is that how that works? Okay. So we're talking about the difference between 6 votes or 7 votes. Okay, and could I ask staff, I think Mr. Dyson had some comments earlier on. I'm just wondering if you might be willing to repeat them. Thank you.
My advice is put it to the members to consider that the 2/3 majority is adequate. A lot of work has been done to get it to where it is today, a lot of consultation through staff and the directors and the work of Ellen Nielsen. I am concerned about establishing a service that has such a high bar for every decision and the potential of the unintended consequences. But it is a political decision, it is yours, but the decisions you make now will last for the service.
Dr. Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. Do we also have the option of deferring this today and letting it go back to Comox to consider based on today's discussion?
Well, I think if it goes to 3rd reading, it does go back to Comox to consider. But Jake, I think there is, because of the inspector of municipalities needing to certify it, there is some time pressure if we do want to get it done before elections. That, yeah.
Yeah, it's just my concern is that if this is a game changer for Comox, I mean, I'd feel more comfortable hearing that from a vote of their entire council, perhaps taking into account the discussion that's taken place today and some of the comments that have been made, and maybe an opportunity to have a rethink of it, because it just seems to me like that it's a wonderful opportunity that a lot of people have worked hard for. We've had a lot of community support indicated, and I really don't want to lose it on the basis of this this particular point. So I just wonder if there wouldn't be an opportunity for Comox to take another look at it with their council. I don't know to what extent the discussion that they've had previously took into account all of the dialogue that's taken place today. Those are just my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. So I guess to staff, what is another pathway for us to get it back to Comox Council, but still meet our sort of timelines on it?
Yeah, our advice is use the opportunity to consult on a bylaw one way or the other, with this amendment or without, as the means to float your proposal. If you delay, I'm afraid that we'll run out of time to get something, a bylaw for you for due consideration in advance of this election cycle. So I think, you know, here's your shot to adopt a bylaw as you see fit tonight, to provide it for consideration of all the participants, take in that feedback and move forward or not. But if you refer this for further staff discussion, consideration, or consultations before you give readings to the bylaw, I'm afraid we'll probably run out of time before the election to do it in your term. having said that, it could be picked up after the election.
Okay, Director Grieve is next.
Yeah, thanks very much. I urge everybody not to get cold feet at this point. This is something that's been bandied around for at least 11 years, and this is as close as we've come to it. We know that, we're talking about 7 percentage point difference here, and we're not talking about a great pile of money. This is starting off very frugally, very conservatively with just a little contribution. Hopefully, as time goes by, we can see our way fit to increase it to the point where it can be very, very effective. I would definitely urge that with the work that's been done by Al Nielsen and the staff on this, that we go with the recommendation as it was presented. We can always go back and rescind it back to first and change it if people feel that strongly about it. But I mean, we talk about control and we talk about comfort, and all those things are valid. But I do believe that in this case, we have an opportunity to actually make real history here and do something that's going to be a legacy for generations to come in the Comox Valley. So, I don't think it needs to disintegrate. I think we need to build the trust. And I think the way to do it is to move forward and through experience and history and working together. I think this is a tempest in a teapot. We should just forge ahead. And if worse comes to worse, we can always have a service review. Thank you.
Director Grant.
Well, I think it's the service review that's probably got our council a little bit concerned about all this, but I think that their correspondence is pretty clear. We had a very wholesome discussion on this. I would suggest that if this goes back to our council, they're not going to change their minds. I don't think it's a big request that we're asking for. I just think it's giving us some comfort that we're not going to get stuck at some point in the future paying a whole bunch of money for something we don't want. And I really don't think that's a big request. Now, my question then would be to Russell. I have some comfort in putting the bylaw in as long as we can go back to our council and say, what do you think? And if they want to change it or they're not in favor of that, can changes be made at that point? Because it sounds to me from this discussion that it's a yes or a no. And I will tell you, I'm almost certain it'll be a no.
Through the consultation process of a bylaw seeking for the participants to provide their consent, the board will receive the response. Participants may not provide that consent, and then the board will have to decide what to do at that point to move forward, whether it revises the bylaw to address concerns or not. I think if you read the town of Comox's resolution, this change does not provide everything they are asking for either. So there is some risk even with making this amendment, because this does not reflect exactly word for word what the town of Comox is asking. And that's why I say either way, whether you go with this amendment or the 2/3, you're putting a bylaw in front of the town of Comox to give consideration to whether their matters have been addressed or not in a specific bylaw that is in their hands for them to review and provide consent or not. So I do caution you that even with this amendment, you're not going as far as Comox asked in the letter of their resolution that they adopted.
So question 2, if this comes to our council for consent and we say no, are we then out?
Jake, could you maybe explain the options for the board if one of the participants doesn't provide consent and what might happen at that time?
Thanks, Russell, through the chair. Yeah, so the way the bylaw is drafted currently right now is it is a regional service. So all of the participants or all of the jurisdictions are participants in the service. So if one member did not consent, then we could not proceed in the current fashion. So we'd either have to rescind and revise the bylaw or start fresh in some regard with a sub-regional service or another arrangement, whatever's workable.
Dr. Arbor.
Yeah, it is pretty ironic that both Director Grant and I were the early wind into this initiative, as I recall, a couple of years ago or whenever that was, following the Stoughton difficulties. And it is ironic that the two of us express the most concern today. And what this conversation revives for me is that Area A is definitely not, at least the town of Comox got their comments formally on the record. And the ASC, we never got our formal comments back into the process. My request to have Hornby and Denman excluded was pushed aside by staff through all the reports. My concerns about the requisition being built on the hospital model really puts Area A in a place where we'll contribute as much funds as the town of Comox, despite having half the population. I've got many concerns around the structure. I also heed Dr. Greaves' call for the greater selves to emerge. But it's, I agree with the RCAO. I think a super majority will be problematic, as I believe that our failure to advance on the water issue today is also problematic. I think he made a comment about that earlier as well. He would not set up a service that one participant controls more than 50% of the vote. So we have two services today that are a little bit, it's disappointing for me because on both things, it seems to be going to a different place. So, if this passes, I don't know. I think the town of Comox should be fine with the 66%, or at least consider it. It's well above 50% anyways, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Hamir.
Yeah, thanks. I'm also going to be voting against the amendment. I am really uncomfortable with not so much, Comox +1 having veto power, but, and not to say that, this wonderful council from Courtney right now would veto. I'm thinking in the future, if the same people are not around the table, as some of the other directors have said, I think we all went into this service in good faith, wanting to work together and in a manner that is best for the community. I don't think 75% is best for the community. It really provides an uneven balance to certain areas. When we know again that it's really in the regional districts where many of these parcels are going to happen, I would. I'd ask that the Comox councillors go back to their council with the full explanation that it's not that we're against Comox +1, but we're against one municipality having a veto power, which 75% would give. So it's unfair, for the rest. Municipal heavy. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. I guess I have two concerns. One is that I think everyone around this table, aside from our Comox directors, agree that with the staff recommendation that 2/3 is the most equitable system for which we could implement the system or the service. And also, as our CAO pointed out, the 75% doesn't actually completely address what came through in the correspondence from Comox Council. So my concern is that we make this change in order to move forward in a cooperative way, which I'm willing to do. And then this 75% change gets discussed at Comox, and there's a realization that essentially what they've done is provided veto power to Courtney when it was veto that they were looking for themselves, and that there's still not support. Because from the discussion that we've had tonight, it does not sound like this change was clearly discussed. It was a desire to not be pulled into a decision without a little more consensus, but the reverse of it is quite ironic in that it's giving more power to one of the participants than the others. So I'm not even confident that supporting this amendment is actually going to result in what we're hoping for tonight. So I'm quite conflicted as to what we do next. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Director Grant.
So it's not our intention to give Courtney veto power, although I do think that if you do have that veto power and you ever exercise it, that you have the court of public opinion to deal with as well. And I think that could be a far harder hill to climb than what we're doing here. But it's not our intention to give them veto power. If someone can come up with a way to give it Comox +1 without giving it 75%, we're all in.
Director Grieve.
Yeah, well, you know, in the real world, I don't think anybody's going to shove a park down anybody else's throat here. You know, there's such a process to get to the point where we're going to be spending money from this service. It really doesn't matter to me what the percentage is, because the percentage you want is 100%. And really, I mean, in a situation like this, that's kind of, you really kind of want it to be unanimous if you're going to go ahead with these kind of expenditures. You know, obviously there could be one person with a different opinion, but even then, I think you have to strive for 100% consent when you go for a big purchase like this. It has to be something everybody agrees on. And besides, we're fighting over the silverware, and the patient isn't even dead yet. You know, we've got so much potential here. I say give peace a chance. Let's do it. And if it's 75% or 66.6% or 74.5%, it's really immaterial, because, you know, at the end of the day, we need to agree on the park. And that's where we'll be before we go doing that sort of thing. It's not going to be dragging somebody kicking and screaming along. Otherwise, we will have trouble. Otherwise, we will have people looking for an exit on this. So, you know, I don't see it being a potential problem. I think because of the nature of what we're trying to do, that the community will come together and establish the vision of the kind of parks that we actually truly need to be regional parks. So honest to God, I don't care if it's 70% or 77% or what. Let's just get her done, because in the end of the day, we're going to be all singing the same tune.
I have to say that I agree with you, Director Grieve. If we're building if we're building toward consensus, if there's strong dissent on a purchase, then we probably shouldn't be moving forward with it. And on a service where there is no exit, and we were told tonight that there is no maximum requisition required, those are two big concerns, I think, for Comox and for Cumberland as well. And if this gives Comox peace of mind that we do have to work harder to build consensus, then I think that's worth moving forward on. Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. 2 points. First of all, to Director Arbery's disappointment on the water issue. Courtney could have used its weighted vote to vote that proposal down today. We didn't do that. We asked for it to be deferred so we could go back and consult with our colleagues and our staff. Two very different things. And I think the question of how that's resolved remains open. The other point I wanted to make is that I think Director Grant's comment about the court of public opinion is very relevant. And I think there's a challenge here where how the court of public opinion would assess this proposal being shot down by one community over the voting structure. I would like to see us build some language into this that states the goal of achieving a unanimous consensus, where the vote is almost academic. I agree with the chair's comments that if one or more groups has a serious concern about moving forward with an initiative, it's probably not going to happen. And whatever the voting structure is, I think the compelling features of the properties that are going to come forward should carry the day. So on that basis, I'll vote against the amendment.
Thank you. Just to Jake on the comments around building in language of working toward consensus, that it still comes down to voting structure. Yeah.
That's correct, Madam Chair. Yes, ultimately we will need some threshold that would need to be met, whether that's a majority of 50% plus one or unanimous support from all the directors or somewhere in between. Yeah, we'll need that clarity in the bylaw.
Thank you. Dr. Arbour.
Okay, so if we want to go to consensus, I would defeat this amendment and suggest that we go for 100% of the vote. That no decision moves until all partners are satisfied with a decision. That's consensus, right? That we would have to work with everybody to make sure that nobody is left behind. So that's 100%. Right. So if the board wants to go that route, I may consider this more than 75, which becomes a bit of a tug of war with some, potential gaming. That's a suggestion. I could also vote the 75%. It's true that we're kind of in the gutter a little bit, but then I would probably want to see if Director Grant would second my amendment to leave Hornby and Denman behind the ship and test it out with this board. But yeah, that's my comment on the consensus model. And I would support more the 100% than the 75%, because in a way, then as individual director of Area A, representing Hornby, Denman, Royston, and all that, I would have a card that's meaningful, right?
So I'll just go to Jake on what that would look like for us.
It's feasible. My only caution would be that it could essentially prevent much action by the committee on operating the service if it takes the support of every participant on the committee. It could be very hard to achieve that in some respects, but again, it's at the decision of the board as to what you feel is satisfactory.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Swift.
Thank you. Where to start? Kind of lost my train of thought now. I think if you sitting around this table for the last 4 years, most of our votes have been unanimous. Not entirely, but most of them. And I think that this was a way to protect ourselves in terms of if there was something we didn't like or didn't want to be part of, we would have a little bit more control. So it allows us to have control over how much is being spent and on what. I don't expect we would I do expect we would reach consensus, and I don't expect we would ever have to do this. It would just bring some comfort to us if we ever were in the opposite side of that. So I take our CAO's point. He doesn't want one group to have more control than the others. But I think it's also worth noting it might not be Comox that is voting against something. So it should just bring everybody a little bit of comfort that we would be working more towards consensus.
Thank you. And Director Morin.
Great, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I actually like the idea of the consensus. And one question I have is, I heard Jake's, concerns, but is there an example of anyone using that model in this circumstance, a consensus-based model? So that's one question. And prior to the idea of consensus coming up, I was also looking at how there's different decision-making points throughout the entire process. And is it too complicated to have different voting structures on decision points? And what I mean by that is, say you're meeting as committee and you're looking at, a variety of possible acquisitions. And maybe you have a voting structure for that decision point. But then when you really, which allows you to maybe get more information and answer questions that people may have around concerns. And then down the road, when you're at more of a final decision-making point, maybe you have a different voting structure. Because I guess what I see is that it could shut down a process. This could shut down the exploration of really good ideas and fleshing them out. So those would be two questions I have. Are there models using consensus already in this way? And is it a possibility, or does it make any sense to look at voting at differences in voting and different decision-making points?
Madam Chair, just to answer the first question, and Mark Harrison emailed me here to say that of all the regional park services reviewed, none have a supermajority. All follow weighted corporate vote structures. And Jake, do you have any comments on the second question as to how other decisions might be modified?
All right, go ahead.
So through Madam Chair, I think, so if I understand the question correctly, what was suggested was essentially the kind of committee, the whole concept or structure in which recommendations are put forward by the committee. Then there's a subsequent meeting, which those are ratified, and that gives that pause or that consideration for any sober second thoughts or otherwise. That had been contemplated with the governance or the service review that was done by the consultant, and whether it would be a body that would provide recommendations to the board, or whether it would function similar to how the Water Committee and the Sewage Commission do, in which it's delegated authority for the administration and operation of the service. One of the concerns, certainly what we're cognizant of, is that some participants may have a concern that the board would then overturn a decision of the committee, and that was a negative prospect in that regard. So the bylaws that's been drafted provides that delegated authority to the committees, so that only very limited decisions then essentially come to the board table. Bylaws, other sort of actions that can't be delegated. So in that regard, the structure has been set up to provide the full authority to the committee, but again, it could be structured so it provides recommendations to the board. But that was there was concerns issued about that. So.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess I'm reluctant to go with the amendment because I think it will create barriers for a fulsome process. Having said that, if we vote the amendment down and it goes to Comox and they turn it down, then they've actually used their power without actually even that, even before we get into the process. So yeah, it's a difficult position, but I also want to say that I do really hear the electoral areas argument. And actually, I don't think that, you know, it's a common complaint around the municipalities controlling everything. So that point is compelling to me as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Grant.
Yeah, so, you know, in our community, we're really not very interested in getting into any more regional or regional district services. You've probably noticed that over the last couple of years. This one, though, is one that our community brought to this table because we thought it was an important enough issue. I think that we're not asking for very much here. And I think that if we gave the 75%, we could probably pass it. I really don't have a lot of concern about Courtney and their veto power, just because if Courtney doesn't want to be in on a purchase of something, we're probably not doing it anyway. So, you know, if we're all talking about consensus here and how that's going to work, if the biggest player didn't want to be part of it, we wouldn't do it anyway. So I really don't, you know, so I don't really see the problem with the amendment that we're asking for. And it's a big step for our community to actually even consider being in a regional service. So if you think that this is going to go back to our council and come back with a different answer, I don't think it's going to happen.
Director Arbour.
All right, well, that's a strong statement. And that's why I'll suggest that if we're serious about this conversation, that Dr. Grieve and Chair Kettler, who agreed so many times tonight, we're losing count. They're asking us to go for the bigger, consensus model. And I think, what if for once we went back to Comox with more than they asked for, and that we said that 100%, and that means that the areas and Cumberland, 4 jurisdictions, are not left out in the gaming farce between Comox and Courtney, that we each also need to be, that we won't be left out at any point, right? So that's, and to be honest, for regional parks, it's not like we're going to make these decisions every year. You know, there's going to be big regional purchase once in a while. And a consensus model would be innovative. We heard it doesn't exist. I'm sure our CEO would advise that there's many reasons why we don't, but there are many jurisdictions around the world, parliaments and otherwise, that try to work on their consensus model. And that would ensure we don't leave anyone behind in any decisions, and that when staff or advisory committee comes back, that and don't underestimate the pressure of if you're the lone person left. Sometimes you may end up with a director that would shut down an entire term, but most often you would end up with somebody who feels, okay, how do I get brought along so I'm not left behind and I can go back to my residence and justify this purchase. So I'll vote against the amendment, and if it gets voted down, I would like to test 100. Thank you.
Director Grieve.
What? I'm left out? Oh, thought it was second. Well, you'll always have an outlier, right? And there's going to be somebody come along. We've done pretty good in this term, but we've had a few real ringers out there that just walking out of meetings in a huff. I think probably Doug knows what I'm talking about. But, 100% is a lot, but I think you are now channeling Arjun, who was the president of EBCM, and he was one of the role models for me that I really followed. And he would not stop until everybody had their say again and again and again, because he was going for a unanimous decision. And we sat around there, with lunch getting cold in the halls, but eventually he got it. And he's the one that taught me to bring everybody along, let's keep talking, all those things that make good governance. So like I said, it doesn't matter to me if it's 66 or 75 or 100%. Really, in reality, it should be 100%. So if we can't get there, then we wait for the next one.
And I think our coalition to end homelessness is a good example of the consensus model, as they've been able to decide on their funding allocations for many years in a row among competing nonprofit interests. So Yeah, it's out there in the community. Director Cole Hamilton, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. And when you mentioned the coalition, I was also thinking of the Community Health Network, which works on a consensus model as well and has been very successful. And I mean, I agree, it is possible for a single individual to gum things up, but I think it would be incumbent upon the remainder to try and help that person see sense. I am more comfortable largely for the reasons that Director Arbor stated, and I'm not going to repeat them, with the idea of 100% than 75. So it's been a very, very difficult decision, but as it stands, I'm intending to vote against the amendment for 75 and support an eventual consensus model when that emerges when Director Arbor puts forward that particular amendment. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Director McCollum.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea of consensus decision-making, but I think in this case, it doesn't make sense. This is a voting structure that's going to exist for many, many terms and many different people around this table. And when it comes to land acquisition, it's a one-shot deal. If you have one difficult person who does not agree with the rest of the committee and has to vote on a tax increase for their constituents in order to buy, a priceless piece of land or a one of a kind opportunity to put away some land for conservation purposes, it would be missed. And that's actually not that difficult of scenario to imagine. I mean, we've been very cooperative at this table, but I believe this is probably more of an anomaly than having one or two difficult people that are not necessarily interested in doing consensus-based decision-making. So I could not support that as a voting structure for this. I think it's too big of a risk, and it's not really what we're working towards. We're working towards coming up with a strategic land acquisition strategy to preserve green spaces in our area. And I don't think a consensus model is the best way to achieve that. So I'm not in support of that. And given the comments from Comox, I am in support of the amendment. Thanks.
Director Hamir, go ahead.
Thanks. So we're discussing how many, what percentage of votes it requires to pass, any decision by this upcoming service. Is there any kind of wording that that we can provide that prevents any single jurisdiction from vetoing? So can there be and also, a negative vote or, voting against would require two jurisdictions to agree to vote against. Is that a possibility in terms of voting? Because that would give me at least some,
Madam Chair, I guess I'm not sure that I fully understand. I guess I can understand the approval threshold that would be required that we can specify in the bylaw, but I guess what Director Mary you're suggesting is
so that no single jurisdiction has veto power. So it requires at least two jurisdictions to agree that the decision is not a good one and that it fails. Is there any kind of wording in a voting bylaw that?
There may be. I'm not sure that I can come up with it on the fly, but
no, that's fine.
But yeah, I mean, certainly if we can draft it and it's clear and defensible, then it can be considered.
Okay.
Director Grant?
Yeah, so I think that's, when I said, is there any way of doing it without the 75 and do it? I think that's exactly what I was just trying to come to. Is there some other way? Because it's a service that I think that we want to participate in, but we want it, like you get one shot at governance. To me, governance is probably the most important thing that we do at the board. And our town, we've been harping at this ever since we got to the regional district. It started long before I ever got here. So it's not just me, that we don't find sometimes the governance structures in some of these things to be proper. And this is an opportunity for us to get it right off the start. if we don't get it right, we already know the pitfalls in our community as to what can go wrong, and we just don't want to go down that road. So if there's a way that you can do that where it takes a 2 jurisdiction thing to stop something, I think that's the kind of thing that we're actually looking for.
Dr. Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chair. I'd been kind of wondering about it, something along those lines. I hadn't managed to clarify it the way Director Amir has, but I think, that change would prevent Courtney from becoming the one which exercised the veto, and that's I'm entirely comfortable with that. Yeah. Anyway, I think this is a novel possibility, and do I understand from Jake that he does see a way of actually writing that into workable language?
That's what he said.
He's not sure. Let's go.
Yeah, through Madam Chair, not entirely sure. And the complicating factor to this is that the way it's been proposed is that essentially it would be a 1 person, 1 vote. The exception to that is the electoral areas, as their population increases beyond 10,000, because there's only 1 representative, they would then have 2 votes on a matter. Whereas the municipalities, for every vote they get, they would have a representative on the committee. That's the framework that's been contemplated by the consultant and what's reflected in the bylaw. So I guess, that aside, if the interest is to have something where there's 2 jurisdictions would have to oppose to defeat a decision, unless Russell's got any thoughts, I think that'd be something I'd want to take away and at least spend a few minutes to look at and think about.
Okay, thank you. Director Morin.
Okay, my question is, if we go with 75% and then it just is a disaster, it just goes bad. I mean, Director Grant's saying, well, it's the court of public opinion, but that it's actually a lot more than that. It's the repercussions, consequences could be much more with one bad experience where you've got, maybe not this board, maybe a future board, different personalities, different, motivations, all that kind of stuff. So I guess I'm wondering what kind of mechanism is there to review or to look at the process and how it's working going forward.
Through the chair. So if the bylaw was adopted as it's presently drafted, and then there was a change sought in the future, that would be an amendment to the service establishment bylaw. So it would require the 3 readings of the amendment bylaw, and then it would require the consent of 2/3 of the participants. So not every participant, but 2/3 of them, just for more percentages, just for in case you're wanting more. And then they would require, again, the inspector of municipalities approval, which would not be perceived as an issue, but just a time issue for sure. So that's the process generally that would have to be followed.
Just a quick follow-up. I've heard of kind of like a conflict resolution process. Is there any avenue for something like that to be utilized without having to go through all those steps that may actually be able to resolve an issue without it having to go through all those other steps?
Yeah, and I suppose the easiest parallel or connection to draw is to the service review provisions. What's been clear or made clear tonight is that the service withdrawal provisions are not eligible for this service for a participant, but certainly there's no restriction on conducting a third-party review or an internal, staff-led review or any other kind of process to resolve disputes to make the service function. Yeah.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Hamir.
Yeah, since we're still on the amendment, I'm kind of thinking beyond that. If the vote, if it fails, I'm not hearing great consensus around the table either way. There seems to be some interest in that two jurisdiction night, and I'm wondering if we did vote to defer, could this be brought back to our meeting at the end of the month? And we don't normally discuss bylaws then, but is it possible on, by the board and have it passed for second and third reading at the end of the month? Yeah, or first and second, whatever we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, if the board chose to, I guess what we'd look for is clear direction from the board on what the change you're seeking. Otherwise, we could repeat this in 2 weeks' time.
Right.
And the bylaw could certainly be brought forward for readings at that.
I'll maybe clarify, I would defer so that staff would have time to look into the idea of a two jurisdiction veto, just so that to see if there is wording around that, and then, possibly bring that forward. So, but I'm here seeing like furrowed eyebrow, so I'll just leave that.
And maybe Russell spoke to this earlier, but the timing again, it's hard for me to put a definitive no, that can't work as far as timing, but we are definitely challenged as far as the time. So I'll just again put that out there, and Russell spoke to that earlier, I think.
And I think that the 75% is as close to the two jurisdiction veto as we can get. There is with the caveat of Courtney having that veto on its own, but as Director Grant said, likely if the biggest player, Courtney, is not in on whatever purchase is being made, then it wouldn't go through anyway. So we actually do have pretty close to what is being discussed with the two jurisdiction veto in the 75% motion. Director Arbor, here next.
Thanks. Yeah, my last comment. Yeah, it's a difficult conversation. And I mean, Dr. Grant really dropped the hammer in saying, this is a no-go for Comox. So that's hard when you're trying to negotiate something, but there's no negotiation margin at all. It's a take it or leave it for the town of Comox. That's not what I read from the letter. I read a request, but it's 3 times he says tonight that won't fly. So we'll take him at his word, which is why we're having this long conversation. So I'm trying to think of scenarios, and this regional service, we have our rural parks, which, we have 63 or 64, and most of them will never come into that basket. They're basically community parks and such. But I'm trying to go to the other end of the spectrum where, there would be a lot of tense decision-making in this room, in a future room. So say that we were about to put a $265 million offer for all of Mosaic Forest lands because they are divesting and they left basically a desert of bad forest management behind them. And we had to decide on 265 million, right? Would we want everybody on board? Absolutely. Because who would want to go back to their community with a no vote, potentially tying them to their share of the pie, which could be 20 or $40 million amortized over 30 or 40 years, right? So I keep going back. I think this is the one service that is not going to meet that often. And that I think it's great. If you have consensus, I don't like the 75, I think it creates winners and losers. It put the areas in Cumberland and kind of la land. It becomes a game of the municipalities. I just don't like it. So I will still vote against it. And right after we'll put forward a resolution for 100% and that we try something unique and that I believe is working.
Director Healing.
Thanks, Chair. We do have one other alternative, which hasn't really been discussed tonight, and that's to let it lie for a time. As our COO has said, if it doesn't get passed in time for this election cycle, it gets picked up and it's still worked on. And not only that, an election actually gives the court of public opinion an opportunity to voice their view on a fairly significant issue. Do we want a regional park structure? Period.
Well, just sitting with that for a second. I'm pretty sure that my community of Cumberland does want a regional park service. It's not something that you want at any cost. And that's why, we do want to have some, I guess, security in that. And I think that it would be a shame to let this go past election. We've been presented reports that have shown the enormous benefit that Regional Park Service have for other areas and other regions. So we can have an opportunity to do so much good here. I wouldn't want to see us give that up. There's some more lights on, so we'll go to Director Grant.
Thank you. I need a recap of where we are. So right now there's an amendment on the table of 75% instead of 2/3. Then Director Hamir brought up what I thought was a pretty good conclusion to get Jake to see if there was some way of doing it with a two jurisdiction veto power. That seemed to get some attention from most people, and then it sort of went to, well, there might be a time frame issue. But I never got an answer to whether that was still possible, because that would give all of the municipalities and everybody a little bit of a chance to digest what we're doing. And I think that I actually really like that suggestion. I would like to get it done in this term. So I'm not sure where that landed as to whether it could still get done in this term if we deferred it till the end of the month and found out if there was some consensus there.
Deferred it to find out more about the two jurisdiction veto. Yeah, I think Jake answered that we could do the one person, one vote, but that in the future at some point, if the areas grew, there would be two votes in that structure. So it would kind of get a little wonky at some point. Is that correct, Jake?
I mean, ultimately, I guess if we were to try and draft something to where two jurisdictions, where they had one vote or two votes, I suppose that if it was clear again that it required the two jurisdictions. And I guess in that regard, if Courtney has 3 representatives or Comox has 2 representatives, it would then mean that both of those representatives would have to vote the same. Or what if they split and one voted in? It definitely, we did. This is what I guess why I'm suggesting that we'd want to think about this to make sure we draft it right. Otherwise, we could tie ourselves in knots.
And it's not super clear direction, which I think is what staff were asking for, to go that way. Director Grieve? Oh, no, sorry, that was Director McCollum at the top of the list.
Sorry, I turned on and off my mic. Yeah, no, I'm in favor of proceeding with the amendment. As I said before, I don't think it's optimal, but I think it's the best option that we have currently with the discussion that we've had. We had an excellent staff report presented by the consultant that gave us an equitable voting structure. Comox is asking for a change. It's not a massive change, but the risk here is that we don't achieve what we set out to do, which is establish a park service. And I think we're almost getting into the weeds too much about this change, and that we're really losing sight of the big picture here, which is establishing a service in which to conserve important pieces of land in our community. And I just want to emphasize that point. The 75% is not my preference either, but what I think is really important here is that we get this service established. So I'm voting in support of the amendment still.
Thanks, Director Grieve, go ahead.
Thank you. To paraphrase Winston Churchill, I think this amendment is the stupidest amendment ever put forward, except when compared to all others. Thank you.
Okay, so, we almost had no lights, but Director Cole-Hampton, go on.
Thank you for allowing me to speak once again to the evolution of my thinking. It is the worst option except for all the others, and having considered sort of the 3 that are on the table at this point, There's the 100% option of consensus. And while I would love to see us reach consensus, I think it's fair to say, not on this board at all, but I think on other boards that we've all worked on in our times, there can be one person who's just not able to be brought around. And if that held everyone back, that would be, yeah, there are short windows to acquire land. So I'm willing to acknowledge that that's, while admirable, that's probably not a reliable goal. And given our CEO was mentioning that even 75% seemed like too great a straitjacket, 100% is obviously significantly more than that. The other option we have are that the two jurisdictions would be required in order to defeat something. And I've heard support, which is interesting, from electoral areas on that from Director Khmer. The only difference between that and what's on the table is that the two jurisdictions would simply stop Courtney from exercising. That's the only way, as I understand it, two jurisdictions would actually change things, requiring two jurisdictions to vote things down. So I think based upon looking at the various options, this is an important thing, and I would be sad to see this opportunity, after all the effort we've been through, it slip through our fingers. So the difference between 67 and 75 isn't enormous, and it's not a hill that I think that the Regional Park Service should die on. So I reluctantly come to the conclusion that probably moving forward with the 75% is the better of the solutions that we have in front of us. So just to clarify the end point of all that thinking.
Thank you. And Director Arbor.
Thank you. If the 75 passes, I will propose another amendment to leave Hornby and Denman out. They won't have access to most of these parks. I've been asking for 10 months for them to be excluded, as they are excluded in many regional services in recognition of the lack of access. If my proposed amendment does not pass and the 75 passes, there's a good chance I will not provide electoral assent to this regional park service. Thank you.
Big part.
He's saying that if this amendment passes at 75%, he will then propose another amendment for the 100%. Right? No?
I will then propose an amendment to leave Hornby and Denman portion of Area 8 out of the function in recognition that they do not have access to all the parks. And if that doesn't pass, then I'm likely to not provide electoral assent.
Jake?
So just to confirm, the approach that is suggested with this, in which the municipal councillors and the electoral areas are able to consent to the approval of this bylaw, the adoption of this bylaw, is contingent upon the electoral area, all of each of the electoral areas being within the service area. So if only a portion of that electoral area is in, it then removes the ability to for the electoral area director to consent to adoption of the bylaw.
Director Hamir.
I think I'd like to move to defer right now then. Just give us time to maybe cool down and just have a sober second thought, go back to our councils and really talk about what's at stake here. But I'll need a second for that deferral.
Okay, it's moved by Director Hamir, seconded by Director Hillian. The discussion should be around, I guess, time and place now.
Deferral to next meeting at the end of the month.
And Jake, can you speak to the implications of that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lengthy debate here, Madam Chair, and so certainly if the board feels like a deferral will allow greater consideration and clarity, perhaps on the 28th, I would suggest that one avenue where timing can be accelerated is with the advancement of the bylaw to the municipalities and their ability to consider passing a resolution to consent to it in a short matter of time. That certainly is one place where oftentimes there can be a delay or a time spent. So there are ways for us to try and accelerate the approval process should we get there, but I appreciate that. I think the greater consideration now is just getting to a place where the board feels comfortable with the bylaw.
Okay, I don't see any further lights, so we are voting on deferral to the June 28th board meeting. All in favor? And opposed? Yeah. Director Hamilton, Cole Hamilton, are you in favor?
Oh, yes, I raised my hand. I voted in favor, yeah.
Yep, then the motion passes. Director Reid.
Just for clarity then, are we instructing staff to work on the 2-member veto? Is that also off the table? And we've heard Director Arbor's proposal, but apparently that would mean that Director Arbor couldn't participate if the islands weren't part of it. Is that correct? Is that what you said? And what would make that so? Are we not masters of our own house here? I'm just asking for clarity.
I believe we've deferred this issue.
Yes,
Chair.
we might need another motion, I think, to ask for more information if we're going to be able to make a decision at this next meeting, and the board wishes to have more information on the 2 veto power. We should make that motion now so that we don't delay this any further.
Is it a referral or a deferral? It's a referral.
Deferral, yeah.
It's the need the direction for staff.
Okay, Director Grant.
So I believe all that Director Greaves was really asking for there was some clarity on what Jake had previously said, which was that you had to have your entire community in. And is that a local government act? Is that a provincial thing, or we have no option?
We do need another motion. I think you can ask that question within your the next motion of asking for more information to come back from staff to that next meeting. But we do need a motion on the floor to continue to discuss it. But we've already voted on it, so we need something to go on the floor to be discussing.
Okay, you're right.
Okay, Director Hamer.
Yeah, I'll make that motion then, that staff, that we request staff to investigate a 2 jurisdiction veto power and to clarify the role of, I don't know how you want to put it, the entirety of an electoral area or entirety of a jurisdiction, their role in forming the service, something like that. Great, thanks.
Seconded by Cole Hamilton.
And I'm not sure if the wording is proper, sorry, because we're doing this on the fly, but does staff get the gist of what I'm asking? And do you need more clarity than that?
Yep, I understand it. It's a two jurisdiction veto power, and it is explaining the implications of not an entire electoral area being part of the service.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, it was been seconded by Director Cole Hamilton. And is there further discussion on this motion of getting more information back from staff? Nope. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? McCollum opposed? McCollum and Warren opposed? Okay. And that passes.
I'd like to move bylaw 722. For first and second reading.
Bylaw 722 is Mount Washington Resort Community Fire Hall Temporary Boring Bylaw. Moved by Grieve, seconded by Grant for first and second reading. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Moved for third reading by Grieve, seconded by Arbor. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. On to the next bylaw, which is 723, the Comox Valley Sewerage Service Conveyance Project Temporary Boring Bylaw. Grant moved first and second reading, seconded by Hamir. And to vote the full board, all in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried. Grant has moved third, seconded by Grieve. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And we're on to bylaw number 724, Denman Hormy Islands High-Speed Internet Temporary Boring Bylaw. First and second moved by Grant and seconded by McCullum. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And Grieve has moved third, seconded by Grant. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And we're on to bylaw 725, the Comox Valley Economic Development Service Conversion Bylaw. Moved for first and second reading by Grant, seconded by Arbor. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Moved for third by Arbor, seconded by Grant. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And for final adoption, bylaw number 703, the Comox Valley Tourism Service Capital Reserve Fund Establishment. Okay. And this is a vote of the areas and Courtney. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried. We're on to bylaw 704, the Comox Valley Regional District Planning Procedures and Fees Bylaw. Moved for adoption by Hillian, seconded by Grant. So the full board, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. And we're on to bylaw number 706, the Hornby Island Community Hall Service Area Conversion and Establishment Bylaw. Moved by Grant for adoption, seconded by Moran. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. We're on to bylaw number 714, the Comox Valley Recreation Commission Bylaw. Moved for adoption by Hillian, seconded by Grant. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Grieve opposed? That's carried. We're on to bylaw number 715, the Union Bay Water Tolls and Other Charges Bylaw. Moved by Hillian for adoption, seconded by Grant. And all in favor? Anyone opposed? That is carried. And bylaw number 718, Comox Valley Water Conservation Bylaw. Moved for adoption by Grant, seconded by Arbor. It's a vote of the areas, Courtney and Comox. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. And